And to that piece of lieutenant that's always on his podcast, bash us, him.
Attention to roll call.
That's right. Good morning, everybody. 8:05 live Eastern time. We got a great guest for you. Retired NYPD Inspector Kenneth, who wrote a great study about mass exodus of the NYPD, of course, about retention. Quite interesting if you haven't had a chance to look at it. I'm sure Ken Quick will be able to refer you how to get that read on it. So, Ken, we'll talk about the study, but before we jump into that, if you could talk about growing up and what was significant in your life to become an NYPD cop. And then obviously later on we could get onto your study. But if you could tell us growing up, where you grew up, what life was like, and if there was anything significant that drew you to the NYPD, or if it was a deity or if it was some type of calling.
All right, great. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning, guys. It's great to be on here. Thanks for having me. And good morning to everybody at home, right? Yeah, the NYPD, well, first off, policing, I have, ever since I was really young, just felt that's what I wanted to do, right? Ever since I was like maybe 3 or 4 years old. So a lot of times, I don't have any family that was on the job. My grandmother, right? I guess her brother, who I never met, was an NYPD cop, right? Back in like 1920, right? But never met him, nothing. So my family is always a little perplexed to this too. Like, what happened, right? So I do have an early childhood memory. I grew up in New Jersey, by the way. I did not grow up in New York. I grew up in northwestern New Jersey. Pretty like
here we go.
I know. The armpit of America. And
there's something about the water in Jersey. I don't know.
No, absolutely. Somebody told me once, people from New Jersey have more state pride for no reason than anybody else I know. But yeah, I grew up out in Jersey in the suburbs, and I have this memory of being about 3 years old, and a bat got loose in the house. A bat, right? B-A-T, like flying loose in the house. And at that point, so my dad died when I was like real young, like 18 months, like never met him. Right.
Oh,
but my
man,
mom,
sorry, dude.
Well, thank you. But my mom, fortunately remarried. And so I know there might be some people listening who are like, oh, I met Kenny's dad. And yeah, I mean, technically he's my stepdad, but he raised me, I think I married when I was 6. Great guy. But during this time when my mom was alone raising 4 kids, right, with my grandma was there helping her, and the bat got loose in the house. So you could imagine the chaos of having a bat loose in the house, right? And nobody knew what the hell to do. My mom definitely didn't know what to do, right? So what do you do, right? It's probably about 9 o'clock at night. What do you do when you don't know what to do? You call the cops, right? So they sent 2 cops from the local town, right? And it was one like young, like female officer, and the other like older guy. So they walk in the house and he tells her, go handle it, right? And my mom, they like, do you have a broom or something? So my mom gives him a broom, and he gives her the old guy cop gives the female cop a broom and says, here, go handle it. And this is like the early 80s, right? So I imagine looking back, there wasn't a lot of female cops on the job. Yeah. And they didn't ride 2-man cars out here in Jersey. So now knowing what I know, I'm like, I bet this was like a field training type thing or something like that, right?
Yeah.
It sounds like it was a prank. Let's bring this rookie to
get killed it. So yeah, line of duty death, right? I mean, she kills this bat, right? But like restores order, restores calm to my family. And like, I remember the story to this day. So I think that's where my admiration from the police grew, right? That I just, I loved watching cop shows. I loved watching, NYPD Blue, Hunter, all those old shows. And so I went to college, studied criminal justice because it was the only thing I was interested in, right? Nobody in my family wanted me to become a cop, right? Then, in college, you see these different studies about the NYPD and stuff. And so one day I heard an ad on the radio, and they were calling for people to take the test. And I said, damn, you know what? I think I'm going to do that. So I told my mom, and she said, that's not necessarily a mother's dream. You know that, right? Like my grandma, who really was a big influence in my life because she moved in, to help my mom with the kids, and raised me from a young age, told me it was like stabbing her in the back with a knife, right? This is the way she felt because she felt like her brother did it, but she never really thought much of her brother. And so I did it anyway. And my attitude was, you know what? I took the test. Obviously, I passed. I got hired pretty quickly within 6 months. I was a backfill though. So, but I think it was because my test was so close to the date. And I said to myself, you know what? I want to do this. I want to prove to myself I can do it.
What year was that?
So this was 1999.
Gotcha.
And, I'd been to the city a handful of times. Some of my friends lived there. I liked it. And you know what? I thought about other careers in law enforcement, federal, this and that. But I kept saying to myself, you know what? When people are at the worst part of their life and they don't know what else to do, who do they call? They call 911, and the boys and women in blue show up, right? And they take care of it. They're not calling the FBI. They're not calling, Border Patrol. They're not calling any of these other places I was looking at. And I said, if you can do that and help people when they're at their worst, where am I going to be able to do that the most? And no place like New York City, right? So I said, if I don't like it, I'll quit. And I went and I got an apartment in New York on a quick, very quick, right? I lived in Sunset Park. I got the apartment so I could get the job and everything like that for the first year. Then I moved out to Bensonhurst. But it was like, I never looked back, right? Because the second I got in there, I was like, no, this is where I want to be.
John, he was your neighbor in Bensonhurst.
I know. The two of my name. My grandmother was from Sunset, and then I grew up in Bensonhurst. So I was like,
there you go.
Yeah. So how was the academy for you? And then where'd you end up after the academy? Like, what'd you think about the academy and all that?
So the academy, I liked it. I really keep in touch with a couple of people from my company still, right? It was just like, it was great. Like we stuck together, good group of, men and women. I like the discipline. I like the exercise. I'd never done anything like that before in my life, right? So it was a bit challenging for me, right? I never dropped out of a run, but I came out in much better shape and I enjoyed it. And then when I got out, I went to the 7-0, which kind of funny, right? I really didn't know where I was picking. And I lived in Sunset Park, so I wanted something kind of close. I wanted a busy house. A friend of mine, in my company says, I have a friend who's a chief. He says he can get me and a couple guys where we want to go. Like, where do you want to go? So I'm like, I think I want to go to the 7-0. He's like, he doesn't know anything. He comes back. He goes, listen, my friend says you're out of your effing mind, right? You don't need a hook to get the 7-0, right? Like, don't waste a hook on that. Like, if that's what you want to do, just put it down. And I met one of the instructors in the academy, had worked there. So I asked him what he thought. And he's like, oh, you're nuts. That place is cursed, right? Because there is a history and lore to the 7-0. There's obviously the Abner Louima incident, which was not that far in the past. I think that was 96, right? So when I got to the 7-0, people were still talking about that. Like, we'd be walking out to our foot posts and people would be talking about, what are you going to take a plunger to me and stuff? And I'm thinking, I wasn't even here when that happened, right? But he said, if you want to go, it's a good house. You're going to learn a lot. So I went and I loved the 7-0, right? It's probably my favorite command in the city to this day, right? I think everybody has a soft spot in their heart for their first command that they ever went to. And it was great. You had the North, very busy, right? A lot of crime. And then you had the South, right? $1 million mansions and everything in between. So when we got there, they said, if it happens anywhere, it will happen in the 7-0. And I think that's true. So I really enjoyed my time there.
You got a great comment here, Ken, from John. I don't know if you know who it is. John with American Flag says, one of our friends and listeners says, worked with Ken at the Puzzle Palace. Great guy. Was way too smart to be NYPD. LOL. Glad to see you as well. So
I think it's Buthorn. I think it's Buthorn.
Is it Buthorn?
YouTube's messing with the names, so I'm not sure.
Okay.
I figured John would put a Marine Corps flag. If it's Buthorn, step the 5, brother. So obviously we know you worked at the Puzzle Palace. We could definitely
Yes,
get
we'll
that later.
get there.
So what I'm interested, right? Because reading your study, it was after the study was shortly after a pay raise, right? So I'm interested, when you got on the job at this time, what were your thoughts on the salary? What was the salary back then? And did that affect your camaraderie, how you felt about the job, or you didn't care? What were your thoughts about the pay at that time?
I mean, the salary was 31,000, so it wasn't a lot. In fact, 31,000, I had to move to New York. I think I was making $730 every other week, and my rent was $750 a month. Right? So I was eating mac and cheese, right? Beans out of a can. My bathtub was in my kitchen, right? I mean, the apartment that I could afford, a fourth floor walk up, it didn't matter to me. I didn't really expect to make a lot of money on this job. You know, at the time, I think top cop pay was maybe like 55. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. Yes, sign me up. And I did get a job offer from the hometown that I grew up in, and I turned it down because I specifically wanted to go to the NYPD. I wanted to.
What was the pay in that town?
It was slightly more. I think it was maybe 34,000, 35,000. So it wasn't life-changing money, but it was a little bit more. I could have lived at home with my mom and dad, right? But moving to New York was part of the allure of going NYPD as well, right? I wanted my own place. I wanted to be able to come and go as I pleased. And I figured in the NYPD, I saw a lot of opportunity. And I saw the ability to make like a lot of friends, coworkers. I figured, hey, I'm a young guy, you know, there'll be other young people going into this, and let me just give it a shot.
So Ken, what would you do as a cop? Like, what was it like your ethos as like a young cop? And then when do you decide you want to move into leadership, or was that like always a thing for you? Like, did you realize like right away, like I'm gonna be a sergeant, I'm gonna move up? Like, how like what was like basically your track in the NYPD?
So I was on patrol almost my entire time in the 70, and I was there for 5 years. And I loved 4 to 12 patrol. We worked with a great group of guys. I met my partner. You know, we came out of FTU together. We partnered up. We worked together the entire time. It was like a cop show on TV, right? He's still a very good friend of mine to this day, right? We're involved in each other's lives, and we just enjoyed going out on the street. I was not a super collar guy, but the one thing that I really prided myself on, and this was what was taught to me by the old timers, is take care of your sector. If you're 70 George Henry, own that. That is yours. You don't want anybody else, any other unit having to come into your sector to clean up anything unless you're actually tied up on something and you have, I mean, if you're tied up on another bag, right, and you can't handle it, then it is what it is. But if you got to come off a car stop, if you have to come off this low priority job to handle something in your sector, you do it. And we had that. It wasn't just me and my partner doing it, right? It was mostly, there was always a few guys who didn't do it, but mostly everybody did that. And that's one thing that when I did move into leadership, I really tried to push that sector integrity, because I think we lost sight of it, but I think it's so important to have that pride and ownership in your area that you're responsible for. And that was my ethos when I was out on patrol. So whatever collars came along, sometimes we were looking, you know, sometimes, you know, we weren't looking. So we tried to find if somebody else was, otherwise we took it. And towards the very end, when I was on the sergeant's list, my partner was really like, well, you're leaving, right? He didn't make the list. He's like, you're leaving. I got to do something. Like, I'm not going to sit here and whatever. So at that point, he put in for CPOP. I put in for CPOP. They gave me a post for like the last 6 months that I was there, and then promoted, moved to the 8th. But one thing I would like to just share real quick, because one thing that really changed a lot of the way I looked at the job, I think it made me mature on the job pretty quickly, was 9/11. I went down on the morning of 9/11, Eric, I actually had to go to your favorite place, CCRB. So I was down there on the morning of 9/11, walked in. It was a beautiful day. And all of a sudden, a detective comes in, right? I know he's a detective based on the way he's dressed. And he goes up into the room, right? The waiting room there. And he says, guys, a plane just hit the World Trade Center. And I'm like, we're all laughing because we're thinking it's like a little crop duster or something.
Yep.
Like, what's going on? So he leaves. He comes back like 2 minutes later and goes up to the lieutenant who's sitting in the room and says, no, Lou, you don't understand. A major commercial airliner hit the World Trade Center. Like, there's body parts everywhere. It's crazy. So the lieutenant says, all right, guys, come on. We gotta hold down a crime scene. Come, let's go. All right. At this point, I think just 2 years on the job, right? I just passed my 2-year mark. So I'm like, okay, I've been running in the 7-0 and everything. What could this be? We go out. It's obviously, it's bedlam, right? It's chaos, right? Sirens blaring, literally body parts like flaming in the street down there, 40 Rector Street. So walk up to the World Trade Center, complete chaos. I'm waiting for somebody to tell me what to do. I'm 2 years on the job, and I guess the job has me so boxed into thinking like, okay, so find a sergeant, find a lieutenant, like they're going to tell you what to do. It was not like that, right? So I'm trying to direct a little pedestrian traffic when the second plane hit. And so it comes screeching in. You hear it from overhead. I didn't look up, didn't know what it was, thought it was a bomb, right? Hits the ground shaking. I dive underneath the fire engine there, right? Because literally the way my brain slowed down, I'm thinking to myself, stuff's going to start falling and I don't want to get trapped. So if I'm underneath this fire engine, either it's going to save me or it's going to end things quickly, right? Either it's going to completely crush or so obviously, thank God that didn't happen. Evolving situation. Now I'm trying to help pedestrians go out. At one point, I'm standing closer to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. Again, holding back pedestrians because of the constant relay of fire engines screaming through that tunnel to get up to the World Trade Center, right? So I self-appointed myself to keep the pedestrians back so they don't walk in front of the fire engines. And at one point I'm standing there, I'm like, oh, I got to use the bathroom. So I go inside this loading dock, ask the doorman there if I can use the bathroom, come back out. And then the first tower falls, cloud dust. So what do? I run back into that loading dock. Now it's completely pitch black. So who's the only one who has a light? A cop with a flashlight on their gun belt, right? I turn on the light. And unbeknownst to me, I'm surrounded by about 25 civilians who saw me running into the building. So they followed me. And this woman who looks like she could be my mother says to me, so officer, what are we going to do now? And I thought to myself, oh, holy shit, this lady thinks that I know what the hell to do because I'm a cop and I'm in uniform.
Yeah, right.
And that was a life moment that I'll never forget. And that was really like, you talk about ethos, right? That's like, they do tell you that in the academy. I'm not going to blame the academy. They tell you that. I'll never forget, you're on the street. But then when that shit hits the fan and you realize that, well, it happened in the 7-0 a little bit on a minor scale, right? But nothing could compare to this. It was really like, wow, this job is completely different. This is like, and we were rock stars after that. I think that, I don't know if you guys were on the job, but I mean, you went from zero with, people talking to you about Abner Louima and the plunger and why don't you go do this, right? 3 years from the past to everybody thanking you. Just being very, very grateful, very appreciative of your service. Even that day, you saw the darkest moment of humanity, right? When those buildings hit the World Trade Center. But when you saw how people were caring for each other, I ended up walking around to the Fulton Fish Market. People had garden hoses out, hosing people off. Eventually I was put in the Intel command center. Again, self-appointed. I remember calling the 7-0 and they were like, wait, who is this? I'm like, Quick. I work on the 4 to 12. They're like, Quick, what the hell are you doing down there? Like, it's like, well, just stay where you are, right?
They didn't even know where you were.
Just stay where you are, right? I'm like, well, where's the guys from the 7-0? I want to meet up with them, right? Like they said, they're sending 1 and 8 from every command. I want to meet up with them. No, Quick, just stay where you are. We know where you are. Stay where you are. So again, I think had that happened when I had 10 years on the job, my attitude would have been a lot different. I would have been like, F you guys, I'm just doing like, but at that point, 2 years, I was still waiting for the orders that didn't come, right? Again, not blaming anybody because it was total chaos. You could never be prepared for that moment.
Well, Ken, I mean, I could tell you're a man of character and that you had a great attitude. You talk about attitude because, I mean, a lot of great comments from our friends and listeners. Michael Freed, if you know Michael Freed, he says Ken is a true success story. I mean, so a lot of people are in your corner saying nice things about you. So,
oh, thank you.
I mean, you're walking us through. You talk about being a cop early on. You become a sergeant, into leadership, and I read your study, which I think was great. So, with that being said, eventually once you get into leadership, and you talked about going from zero to hero, and we went full circle. We're back to zero now. And a lot of the premise of this network, we talk about how policing has been infected and injected by politics, and a different site that we've understood in the past. So could you tell me when you got into leadership then and also now, if you could compare or if there's any similarities and differences, do you think that the command level leadership understands policing or politics better then or now or both? If you could indicate the similarities and differences in that.
Well, yeah, no, that's a very good question. I think it was a different world, right? I mean, at least from my perspective, and I always have to remember that I wasn't very high in the organization. So maybe I wasn't seeing things, but it's pretty transparent for us to see the role that City Hall has now in the police department. I didn't see that back then, right? I mean, I came in under Safer, then there was Bernie Kerrick, right? I mean, Giuliani was supportive of the police department, maybe monetarily wise, right? But the perception was definitely, I mean, I don't think he gave very good salaries. That's what people bring up when they raises, when you talk about Giuliani. But he was very, very supportive of the NYPD. And I think Bernie Kerrick then took over shortly after. He was the commissioner during 9/11. It seemed like he was definitely running the show, at least from my perception. And then with Kelly, right? Kelly, I didn't see a lot of City Hall appointments, a lot of people coming into the police department, right? I didn't see it. It was obviously an important, issue for Bloomberg, but it seemed like Kelly was running the police department. And I think that started to change a little bit with de Blasio, right? But being more with his hand in the mix, but not nearly as much as it has been under the past 4 years. But none of that's really mattered to us when we were, cops on patrol or even sergeants. When I got promoted, I went to the 8-3, another good command. And I never really cared who the police commissioner was or who the mayor was, and as a cop, I didn't really even care who the precinct CO was. I cared who my squad sergeant was. So I recognized, and we had some great sergeants in the 7-0, and we had some, I don't even think they were bad. They just weren't as great as the great ones that supported us, that taught us, that mentored us, that trusted us and empowered us. That I wanted to be one of those people. I alluded to John when he talked about the ethos. Yes, I believed in sector integrity. Most of the guys I worked with, there's always those few people that don't. And you know what? Those of us that do, that were the workers, kind of loved when the sergeant would be like, no, Central, you give that EDP to sector Adam, or you give that job to this one. And it's like, man, I can't do that because I'm a cop, but that awesome that sergeant did that. And I wanted to be one of those guys that could do that and would do it and wasn't afraid to do it and would call out people that weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing.
What do you think was like your like you talked about your come to realization moment, 9/11, right? The woman in front of your face, and you're like, oh man, this is real. It's me, like what do you did you have any of those moments like in leadership, like when you became a sergeant and then like to like that now I'm in a different, like I'm not a cop anymore. I'm in leadership. You're still obviously always a cop, but you have this other added level of really responsibility to you now. It's not, you're not just worried about the public now. Now you're really leading the troops that are those people. Like, so did you have any moments like that in leadership that was like an awakening for you, or anything you could share with like young people looking to get into leadership or just starting out?
It's funny because I feel like when even though we were cops, I mean, I feel like the sergeants groomed you for leadership, even before it was on the list. Once I got on the list, man, they all did, right? Like, oh, look for this when you get promoted, Kenny, you're going to have this. When she heard that I was going to get promoted, she said, you know what, why don't you do a couple day tours with me? And sit on the desk with me. She never went out on patrol, but sit on the desk with me. And she was an old timer. Her name was Jenkins. I don't know if I know some of you were in Staten Island for a little bit, so maybe because I think she came from. But man, I sat on there, and I'd never been ADO a day in my life, right? But she took me to do that for a couple of tours, and just like she told me, listen, the squad is going to try to book a phantom prisoner. They're going to come down and they're going to give you a pedigree card, and they're going to say, yeah, the guy's up there. We searched him, whatever. You don't book phantom prisoners, she said. You make them come down. They're going to hate you for it, but guess what? You're going to make sure that you keep them safe, because they're going to search him in front of you, and they're going to make sure he doesn't have anything on him. And so, little lessons like that, I feel like, at least back then, and I don't think it's going on as much now, but leaders really saw that part of their job was to groom future generations of leaders, and that it was a natural mentorship. So I took advantage of that. I tried to pass that on as best I could, throughout all the ranks, just taking time to groom people and not hurt them, right? But just sort of pull them aside and tell them, listen, this is what you could do, to try to get this officer on the right path, right? Maybe you don't have to kill them. Maybe, you can mentor them. And I had plenty of bosses who stood up for me when I did something that was wrong, but innocently wrong. I had plenty of bosses who stood up for me and said, no, Kenny's a good guy, right? Like, he made a mistake. So I always tried to be that person. And I told the men and women who work for me, if you make an honest mistake, you will have no greater advocate in your corner than me. But if you're messing around and you're doing the wrong thing and you're trying to screw over your team, or you're trying to, take shortcuts, or you're not doing the right thing, then you'll have no bigger enemy than me either, right? I'm going to be the one who's going to address it. But that's all stuff that I learned along the way, just from sticking with people who did it well.
Well, you know what? I think that's fantastic. I mean, you talked about the leadership style. You talked about what you learned from the job that helped you in leadership. So what would you say was your leadership style? And I love that you talked about, how you would talk to them. So how did you balance that? How did you balance holding the cops accountable, at the same time making them feel supported, right? Because a lot of what we talk about is morale and camaraderie, and really morale gets affected by leadership. So how did you balance that? That's so important. We talk about that often. How did you balance the scale of holding them accountable, but making them feel supported?
So I think it's something that you grow into, right? I think, like, when you first become a sergeant, you are naturally, at least I was, right? I think I was a little bit more of a hard ass than I had to be. And that was something that I learned to, temper down as time went on. Like, because you come out of BMOC, and listen, they tell you in BMOC, and some of it, I guess is true for some people's experience, that, like the cops are going to hurt you. They're going to get you jammed up. They're going to do this. I have found, right, that that's not true, right? In other words, I think you have to be vigilant as a boss. You have to be engaged, but you don't always have to suspect things are coming from the in other words, the officers, they're not trying to hurt the supervisors. I think if anything, they're trying to support the supervisors and get the mission done. It was actually, he was a chief at the time. And I remember, when you go to BMOC, they also take you, on this tour of, you guys probably remember, or maybe they didn't, something that changes. But I remember at one point, it might've been when I was a captain, because we went and met with different chiefs. And I remember Shay, who was a chief at the time, and he said, listen, be careful of what you ask the cops to do, because they're gonna do it. Don't ask them to do anything that you wouldn't do. Don't ask them, to push things like CompStat is CompStat. I think he was in charge of CompStat at the time. He's like, listen, you're gonna have good days, you're gonna have bad days. It's nothing personal. Don't let like the pressures of you try to, down on people. And that was something, certainly as an executive, that I definitely saw as my role, was to be a buffer between the upper administration and my men and women, right, who were going out there doing the job. Like sometimes I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but for a while I was in charge of the borough specialized units, right? Borough crime, auto larceny, ECT as a captain. And I saw that as really part of my job, was to go to these meetings. And if I know that my guys are working, right, and they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, if I feel that this criticism coming to me from upper management is not justified, I'm going to let it die with me. I'm not going back to the base and screaming, why aren't you guys doing this? Or let that stress permeate downward, right? I'm going to take it on my shoulders, which gets into the health and wellness and everything that we're going to talk about too, right? And morale. I think that's a key part of a leader, right? Is to stand up to support their people when they're doing the right thing. And if you're getting tackled with criticism that's not justified, let it die with you, right? Don't keep pushing that down into the organization.
Yeah. What do we kind of just jumped there. And I remember I was in Brooklyn. I was a sergeant in Brooklyn South when you were in charge of the specialized units in Brooklyn South, right? I think you had just started the blast unit. And I had a guy, really, really young kid, but he was really active and he was a good kid and I loved him. And he was on my team. And, he had reached out to me and he's like, hey, Sarge, I just got a call. They're interested in me going to blast. And so I was like, I always wanted the best for like the guys that work for me. I always saw like past like what we're doing right now. I'm like, this is temporary right now, right? Like this kid's going to grow. He's got a great opportunity. So I was like, yeah, listen, I was like, I'll be honest with you. I think you should go. I was like, I think you should go. I think it's a good opportunity. Like go over to blast. And I'll never forget, my CO ripped me out for it. He's like, because the kid got scared. He was a young kid. He had like 2-3 years on the job. And he's like, I talked to McCarry and he thinks that I should do it.
No.
And so the CO like ripped me out. He's like, what are you doing? We need him. And I'm like, look, I get what you're saying. I don't want to lose him either. But like, I just think this is a better opportunity for him. You're going to move on. You're going to be out of here. I'm going to be out of here. Like, I just think it's a better opportunity for him. And I don't want to hold him back. And what are your thoughts on that? Like in the New York City Police Department, like as far as like mentoring young people, like you talk about, like you kind of mentor them into leadership, but you kind of also mentor them on a career path. Like, and I think a lot of that's missing now as well. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, maybe they're not going to get into leadership per se, but you're always going to be a leader, whether it's from, whatever standpoint you're in. But like, as far as like mentoring them throughout their career as like a leader, like to like, you should do this, or not to guide people, but like just to guide them, like, see past where they're at, basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think that's a big role of being a leader, right? Is to try to help people move on in their careers, right? And I mean, I pride myself on, when I look back on, and I still have relationships with people, but people who I helped, right, either move along to a specialized unit, they want get a discretionary promotion, right? I mean, listen, anybody who I got promoted, and I did not get them promoted to special assignment. They did it themselves. By all means, they did it, but you need an advocate and you need a leader to like push, which in terms of leadership, right? I always tell people your reputation has to be good to do that, right? You have to have a reputation that you can advocate for your people, right? So upper management, you have to have a good relationship with them, and you have to be known as a worker and somebody that they can trust in your opinion. Otherwise, you won't be able to advocate for your people. People will be like, Kenny, quick, get that pain in the ass out of here. I don't want to hear anything he has to say, right? But if you work and you do a good job and you become a trusted person that they can trust your opinion on certain issues, then yeah, you go in and you say, I have so-and-so, and he's been a sergeant here for so long, and he's been doing this, he's been doing that, and I want to get him a special assignment. You know, the 49 is one thing, but you have to be able to push the 49. Otherwise, it just goes wherever it goes and dies a slow death. So I think doing that, right, and helping people move on is what, to me, I look back on that I hold those memories, that experience dear, right? That I was able to do that. And I probably could do that when I was in the specialized units most, because all those guys wanted to go to the squad or they wanted to go to intel. That's how you get people to come there. But you can't be delivering empty promises and just say, hey, come here, work in borough crime, right? Do 2 years and I'll get, you got to be honest. And I say, listen, you come here, you work hard. I'm going to push for you. If you're one of my guys who works, I'm going to push for you, and look at how this person, that person, this person went on to these assignments. And then you deliver, but you have to have the ear of the borough and be empowered by the borough to do that. And fortunately, I had that, right? My borough leadership, as much of pains in the ass as they were when it came to the ComStat stuff. All right. And if you think ComStat meetings are rough, right? If you've been to borough stat meetings, they're worse because there's no camera. But as much as that was, and it made me develop into a better leader, they did support the people who were doing the work. So I look back and I don't think we left any man behind. I think, they got the squad. If you wanted intel, you were going to be waiting a while, but eventually, we did. And it was all because they worked hard. They came there because they didn't know anybody, but they worked hard and they earned it. But absolutely, you have to have an advocate.
Yeah, absolutely. That kid's a homicide detective now. Danny Zhang, great cop, great cop.
Oh,
yeah. And so he's a second grade homicide detective. Exactly. I'm sure he'll be a first grade homicide detective, had an affinity for the job. So I didn't mind getting my ass chewed, but I used to tell him, you suck.
John, I remember, hey, listen, I got my ass chewed by the same CO because I was a captain. That's the borough crime, the borough specialty captain. And then you got to try to navigate this political system, and none of the COs like you because you're poaching their people.
Yeah. Ken, I'm with you on these sentiments, and John, I feel the same way, that you should let people expand in their careers. And for me, leadership has been one of my life passions. I read so many books on leadership, and I think it's so important that I even would tell my COs. Fortunately, I had the best cops. I really did. I got to handpick them, selected them, doing special operations. But I said, give me the 5 or 6 worst cops in the command, and I'll give you a hell of a team. I'll give you a great team, because I really feel leadership could be so impactful. I feel it's so important. And by the way, brother, you're on fire over here. You're getting some love in the chat. Thank you, by the way, friends and listeners. I appreciate it. X Hardcore says, guys like Ken are a needle in the haystack. They have their views because they led properly. Most, however, have had nightmares as commanding officers. I tell you, you got a lot of support today. So could you tell me, because I'm a firm believer that it's the failures that actually lead to success. That's where we learn from. So could you tell me, is there any situations on the job that you remember that you led, that you made mistakes and that it was a failure and you learned from it and it changed the way you led later on in your career, especially since you made it up to inspector?
So let's see, a real failure. I mean, I've been fortunate to have people that I could speak to, right? People who I trusted, people who I spoke to. I will say this, and not necessarily that I think it was a failure, but when I was the CO of the 6-6, and that was, I went from borough crime to the 6-6, right? So this you're changing gears a little bit into the community,
What are you and John following each other? John's in Bensonhurst. You moved to Bensonhurst. He's in the 6-6. You go to the 6-6. What's going on?
I would have loved to have John there. I'm surprised I didn't recruit him to be the sergeant for the blast team. But yeah, no, he must have left right before I got there. So anyway, so I was in the 6-6, and there was a sergeant there, good guy from my perception. He was wearing a lot of different hats, right? And I feel like that is you don't have one person doing multiple jobs, right? To me, that's a managerial failure, right? That's a failure of leadership. Nobody should be so essential to the place that they're doing a lot. The community really liked him. He got promoted to lieutenant. He goes over to another command in Brooklyn South, and the community keeps asking me, you got to bring this guy back. You got to bring him back. The guys who work there, you got to bring him back. You got to bring him back. The borough chief is getting incessant calls about this guy. You got to bring him back. It's not the same here. No, he doesn't know. These people don't know what the community needs. You know, everything is good. So I'm like, listen, good. I like him. You know, he's a good worker. Like yeah, you want to give him back to me? I'll take him back. So, because the chief called to ask me, I said, yeah, I'll take him back. You know, he's a good guy. I never had a problem with him. You want to give him back to me? Fine. Yeah. Who would say no? And fast forward shortly thereafter, the 6-6 actually went through a really rough road while I was the leader there.
That came out when you were the CO.
I was the CO, and that was a tough, challenging time because just for those people who might not remember, there was allegations that the upper echelon, right, including all the way up to Chief Banks, who was the chief of department, was engaged with these two Orthodox Jewish businessmen, right? And that many executives in between, in fact, a lot of executives were forced to retire. A guy who, listen, I don't keep in touch with him, but, you know, I could still consider him a friend. I would take his phone call if he called me, right? Jimmy Grant. I was his XO in the 7-2. Ended up going through a trial, getting acquitted, right? Another chief went through, took the plea. I don't know. The word on the street was, you know, took the plea to avoid the legal cost. Listen, I don't know what people did. I know what I did. I know that when I got to the 6-6, there were some community things that I thought needed to be reined in, which I did. And I know when the investigation unraveled, you know, I was complimented about it, and I was told, you know, believe me, you stemmed the bleeding, right? We were glad you were there because, you know, things could have been a lot worse. My point is, when you talk about decisions you regret, that particular person who came back was amongst the group that was alleged to have been doing things that were inappropriate, some of which were inevitably while I was there, because I'm not a micromanager, right? If I don't have to be, right? And I don't think you should ever be a micromanager, but I think sometimes you have to be more directive. So I think my mistake was, I don't think I wouldn't have taken him back. I think we got to move on. I think nobody should be that essential. Now, there was a lot of political forces, but I think I would have made my objections a little bit more known. Not that I objected. I don't want to revise history. I was happy to get this person back. I thought it was a good move. But looking back on it, I say, you know what? I should have realized that if you know, too many people want the same person. Listen, this job's nobody's irreplaceable. And if they are, it's a managerial failure, right? It's a failure in leadership. We should be having redundancy. We should have people able to fill in there's always going to be a little bit of a gap, right? When any of us leave, there's going to be a gap. But the sign of a good organization is it's a hiccup. It's not like a major setback.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, behind hindsight's 2020, and you would have had no idea, like, and again, I when I look back at that whole scandal, because I worked there, I thought it was totally blown out of proportion. I thought, I really think it was like they needed people to be the fall guy, and the NYPD was the fall guy for a lot of it, because I knew Reichberg and all of them, and
right.
yeah, they were like pushy, and they would try to like kind of like navigate their way in, but I never dealt with those. Like, I didn't deal with it. Like, I think some people just got a little closer to them than they should have. But like it was coming from the mayor's office. It was coming from the mayor's office. There were plenty of times I told them to F off, and they were called high level calls that came down, and so it was like, I think a lot of it was the job's fault more than it was the people in the 6-6, or more than the borough's fault. I really think it came from the mayor's office and One Police Plaza, and then they just dished it out to everybody in Brooklyn South, and like really hurt a lot of people. And I thought it was wrong. That was a bad time, actually. That was a bad time. And I don't like the way the job handled it at all. And there were people like in charge of the investigation, and I'm like, wait, you're in charge of this investigation? That's weird. You were hanging out in Brooklyn South too. Weren't you hanging out with those guys? Like, and so like that must have been a rough time for you, man. That's a
yeah. When there's TV cameras out in front of your command, it's never easy, right? But yeah. I did always go to roll call and try to remind the troops that, hey, listen, like, we did nothing wrong, right? Our heads are held high. We're working where the department assigned us to work. And by the way, the people who, were transferred or duty status changed, because some of them worked right there with us, right? I said, listen, we don't know. And they have to be in our thoughts and prayers. And listen, unless you know something I don't know, which I hope you don't, but unless you do, they deserve our support, right? I mean, nobody should be going out there talking smack, this and that, right? Like, give guys a call, make sure they're doing all right. Like, they deserve our support because they were here yesterday and we were working along with them, and we don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Kenneth, I'm sorry. I just want to say, it seems like you attract like black clouds. You were in the 7-0 and the 6-6, all these black clouds.
Yeah, a little.
And the thing, like a lot of the corruption scandal that came out, particularly if you guys remember the gun licensing division, like that whole scandal that broke out too, that came out from the cops in the 6-6. Like that came out from one cop in particular in the 6-6 who was like, he's like, somebody's offering me something crazy. He called IAB and he went through
right. Yeah. And I was behind
and they didn't, and you guys didn't get any credit for that. You didn't get any credit for that because that was solely based on, I don't know if he wants me to blast them out, but like that was solely based on the integrity of one cop. That whole investigation, that whole thing that came out, that was like, wait, what? And he did what he had to do. I like to report it to stem corruption and illegal actions that were happening. So you guys didn't get any credit for it. It was like they made it like all over the news. It was like, oh, it was the feds. I was like, that wasn't the feds. That was a cop in the 6-6. Like, like that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, I'll never forget. It was 6 a.m. because I think they have to wait till 6 a.m. I'm laying in bed with my wife, and I hear a pounding on the door. I mean, it sounded like a battering ram at my front door of my house in Staten Island. I thought my house was on fire, and one of my neighbors was pounding on the door trying to wake me up. I'm getting out of bed. I'm all disoriented. I run to the front door. It's two guys in suits, FBI, can we come in and talk to you for a moment? You're Captain Quick. Yeah, you're the CO of the 6. He's like, can we come in and talk to you for a moment? Now, thank God I had found out that this was going on. Like, I wasn't the first person they came to. So I said, do you have a warrant? No, we just want to come in and ask you a couple questions. I go, guys, it's 6 o'clock in the morning. My kids are sleeping. You know where I'm going to be. I'm going to be at my precinct by 9:30. Like, you can come talk to me there. Like, boom, and then what's really messed up, so important, they come to my house at 6 o'clock in the morning pounding on the door, right? They don't actually call my lawyer and come and sit down, and we sit down and we talk to them at the federal building next to 1PP 6 months later. So it was so important you needed to speak to me that you were going to come to my house at 6 a.m. But it could wait 6 months now that you know that I have a lawyer representing me through the CEA for us to actually sit down and have a conversation.
I hope you took a couple of toes out from those FBI guys when he was slamming the door on him. Hey, here's your toes, buddy. Listen, I just want to say I appreciate your humility, and I'm curious if you actually. I read the book by Steve Jobs and his leadership style, and he believes that organization is exactly what you said, that people should be not so essential, that the system in place has to be more essential than the people. For that reason, people have to move on in their careers. You know, I'm curious right now. So you obviously became a commanding officer. You made it to inspector. And one of the gripes that I have, my disappointments about the leadership that we have right now, and some in the past, but ultimately, specifically right now, is that people are putting their careers before their moral principle. And that's where people are not putting their necks out. And quite often I heard Rodney Harrison on Mike Cologne, New Haven podcast, talk about Daniel Pantaleo and how he was wronged. But we know he never stuck his neck out for him. And a lot of people talk to me, and I was pretty expressive about that on social media. Oh, what do you want the guy to do? It's career suicide. And I think, well, some people have to stick their neck out. So can you think of a time in your career, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but, you seem such good character. So can you think of a time in your career where you had to do the right thing for your people rather than what was safer for your career?
I mentioned borough stat, right? So that's the one thing that really comes to mind, right? And I could probably think of some better examples, but I can remember they had these zones, right? I mean, listen, it's hotspots policing. They want the cops in the zones. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on one second. Let me I thought my laptop was plugged in.
Marlon's not here today.
No, sorry. I thought my laptop was plugged in.
All good.
I've done that a few times, and I realized it's about to go dead, and I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah.
Well, but I plugged it in, so we're good now.
Yeah,
but they had these zones. They want the guys in the zones. I get that, right? It's crime mapping. I can understand how a crime map works. But right, we turned out a borough task force. They got to get to the zone, and sometimes they would do a car stop if it looked good, right? And so maybe they get some drugs out of the car. Maybe they get a gun out of the car. Well, if they get a gun out of the car, nobody cares. If they get drugs out of the car, then all of a sudden it's becoming an issue. They're out of the zone. And I would push back on the borough, right? On the execs that were there. I would push back and be like, listen, these guys are thoroughbreds. You want me to check the range so much, then they're not gonna be able to do, what they're doing, right? And this is going to happen, right? And like I said, so I would absorb that and take it back. Now, I know one time in particular, because once a new borough chief came, right? The guys probably know him, Chief Powers, right? So, listen, the one thing I will say is he stands up for his people. If you're a worker, right, he is behind you. But if he doesn't think you are, he's going to be all over you. So a couple times, the borough execs were all over me. And I was like, listen, this is, sometimes you have to fall on the sword, but I'm not going to just sit here and roll over. The guys are out there. They're doing the work. They're doing what they're supposed to be doing. And I'm not going to sit here and other times, you push back a little bit, eventually you yelled at, but I would never bring it back, never bring it back to the unit to yell at these guys and say, what are you doing car stops? I want you doing car stops. Like if you see a good car, if it's on the way to the zone, it's on the way to the zone. And then sometimes they get bored and they wander, and listen, they're doing police work, right? I had a lieutenant who worked for me who said, you know what, you might yell at me. And he wasn't saying it about me because I never yelled at him, but he said, I always say you might get yelled at for doing police work, but you're not going to yell at me for goofing off doing nothing. So.
What are your thoughts on like CompStat, borough stat overall? Do you think there's any areas for improvement? I think it gets a lot of flack internally, but I think it really is a good thing. I do think that we need to know what's happening, and to like steer, see where have like a top down overview of what's happening in each command, and seeing where the fails are and the stick points, and helping to move them along. Like, what are your thoughts overall about like the entire stat keeping? Do you have any suggestions on how it could improve, or do you think it's good the way it is? Like, what are your thoughts?
I'm not sure exactly how it's being done now. I know that when I was on the job, like it went from, there were times where some of these meetings were very adversarial, right? Like, and then there were times when it was a little bit more mentorship, and like the chiefs up on the dais, they would be like, hey, we're not, listen, I know you're stretched thin. We're not, beating up on you here, but take a look at this, right? Take a look at that. And I think that when that's done that way, listen, what gets measured gets done, right? And when we move into health and wellness, we'll talk about how that ain't getting measured, so it's not getting done, right? And they could be measuring, they could be looking at, why are cops leaving? Why are people dissatisfied? If they're doing it behind closed doors, right? So you mentioned CompStat. Yeah, it's an effective tool. I think it's necessary, right? The one thing that I realized is that if you're prepared, like, you're not going to get me looking like completely stupid unless you're, really digging in the weeds, and then you're just not being fair. And then it doesn't mean as much to me. I had crime patterns going on in the 6-6 right down by Avenue M, very kind of quiet residential area. It was burglaries. And so they were like, well, you don't have any activity in that area. What are you doing? All right. So next time we go back, send them to the parks, addressing quality of life. Well, now it's not where the burglaries are. It's one block over. I'm like, well, those guys who are sitting in the park might be walking through, doing the burglaries. I'm keeping the cops in the areas where the burglaries are happening. Maybe they'll come across it. All right. You want me you want like a C summons from exactly the building that a burglary happened. That is not a credible criticism in my view. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to push back a little bit. If they keep coming at me, I'm going to say, okay, no problem, sir. We'll take a look at it. And then I'm going to let it die with me. I am not going back into the command screaming at my guys, how come you're not getting C summonses on East 15th Street? Like, it's because you can't, not legitimately.
I think that's a good point, to bring up borough stat and CompStat. And I went to CompStat quite often because I was special ops lieutenant, especially working in the South Bronx. I was there every 4 to 6 weeks. And one thing I learned, there were many good commanding officers, and they were there because they legitimately were trying to fight crime in their precinct, and they were trying to balance out the analysis that was coming from the dais, and also their own analysis, right, being an actual frontline command presence. But what I also learned is some of those commanders they were just there to manage their appearances, and they really weren't fighting crime. And that's where I find is the hole with CompStat. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that CompStat is still a good crime fighting tool? Do you believe that the commanders are there for those reasons, or do you believe they're there to manage appearances?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's a little bit of both. At least I haven't been to CompStat in a long time, right? But I do think that there are certain favored people, right? Favored executives who get lined up that they're going to look great. So it's about managing appearances. But then I think for most of us that are there because we achieved the rank of captain and then worked and did whatever we needed to in their assignment to navigate, being a CO or it's a real tool. So I think it can work both ways. I think sometimes, as you said, Eric, it could be managing appearances, especially if it's somebody who has the inside track that they want to elevate. The person's going to come out looking good. But for most of us who are just there trying to do police work, they're measuring what we're actually doing. And I think the problem is a lot of people want to avoid the boss. And this goes on the command, but this even goes like, amongst the CEOs, right? You just really don't want to deal with your boss, whether it be a chief or whatever. You get in that mindset. I want to kind of avoid them. But CompStat gives you an opportunity to impress them, to really show them what you're doing, right? So it's not something that you really want to avoid. It's actually a good opportunity to highlight some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Chief Palumbo's on. He says, what did he say? Tuesday deployment meetings were a Shark Tank.
Yeah, we were there together. It's nice Jimmy's there, if you can remember.
Yeah. Chief Marino's on here. We have George Misfoot on here. We got a lot of good guys in the chat now.
Speaking of George, thank you for the coffee and donuts, brother. We appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you,
brother. And I think
John,
I think George beat you, because every time I go to Facebook, he's got a shirtless picture on. I'm like, I thought it was John with all the shirtless pictures, but then there's George. So George, yeah, you're looking good, brother. Yeah, every time I see his pictures, I'm like, damn, I gotta get back out there.
I think listen, George, he's doing good, man. I think I'm gonna do a 72-hour fast after New Year's, and then I'm gonna go to G2 training because I want to look like George when I get older. So he's doing great. He's doing awesome, man. Shout out to you, George. So all right, so you kind of you get thrown into a crazy political whirlwind in the 6-6. Where do you go from there? Like, where does your career take you from there? And my other question is, like, a lot of people are asking what you do now on here. And, just for everyone to know, Ken's a doctor. He's got a Ph.D. My other question is, as you're progressing in the New York City Police Department, did you take advantage of any of like the educational opportunities? Are there any that you recommend? And like, how did you get to a PhD? Is that something you attained after the job, or were you going to school during like your career as well as you progress?
Okay, so I actually went back and got my master's degree through the police department, through the NYPD. They have a scholarship unit. I applied for I was a sergeant in the 8-3. In charge of, they had the BAT team, the burglary apprehension team, right? So I was just like, it was something I had heard about in BMOC a few years before. And I was like, that's a good idea. Like, I should do that. So whatever inspired me, I actually did it. I applied for a scholarship to go to John Jay to get my master's degree. So I'm riding around on patrol. I get a phone call from the lady at the scholarship unit, and she's like, yeah, Sergeant Quick. I'm like, yes. She's like, congratulations, you got the John Jay scholarship. I'm like, I did. I thought the guys were pranking me, but I'm looking around. I'm like, my team is here, right? And then she says, listen, this was a lot of competition for this one. You really, are fortunate to have gotten it. 10 people applied, and I'm thinking, man, this job has 40,000 people at the time, and 10 people applied for the scholarship that gave you a full year leave of absence paid to go to John Jay. All expenses paid to get your master's degree. So, public service announcement, apply for these scholarships.
Wow. I didn't even know that. That is unbelievable.
They have one in Albany.
That's
at least
pretty
they
cool.
used to. My information may be dated. They have one in Albany. The two in Albany that often people don't even apply for. They go unfilled because guys don't want to move to Albany and get an apartment.
I didn't even know they had half these things that existed.
I know. Well, they do tell us in BMOC. I mean,
yeah.
And I, it was something I remember hearing about in the academy too. So I get my master's degree. My CO signed my application form, and then when I had to go in and tell him I got it, he goes, "Are you kidding me? I would have never signed that thing if I thought you could actually get it." And he's like, "Oh, they're not even going to let you come back here. Good luck with the eggheads in OMAP," he tells me.
Yeah.
And so this is the first time I heard that if you get a department scholarship, you're going to go to OMAP, right? And I don't know if it's still that way. I think they might have changed it, but I'm like, OMAP? What the hell is OMAP? Like, I've never even heard of this before. So I go on the scholarship. And by the way, my master's was in protection management, like doing security risk assessment, because I got some advice. They say, oh, this is going to be really marketable when you retire, right? You're going to going to be like a counterterrorism person. So I'm like, oh, maybe I'll major in that, because then maybe they'll put me in counterterrorism when I come back, right? Because I'll have all this great knowledge. And they're like, nope. I come back, they're like, yeah, go interview with the chief of OMAP, right? So you go to OMAP on the interview, and they're like, basically, listen, kid, somebody told me before I went in, they primed me. They go, this is like IAB. You're here. The only way not to get here is if you really sandbag your reputation and come out looking like an idiot, that they're like, yeah, this guy like doesn't know anything. You don't want to do that. So I went to OMAP, and OMAP, Office of Management Analysis and Planning, for people who don't know, right? So they're the think tank of the NYPD. So it makes kind of sense to put people in there who have their higher degree, because you're doing like these. It was funny when I first, but it's, so you're doing these analyses, these projects for the department, but there is no rank up to captain. So if you're a sergeant or you're a lieutenant, you are considered like an analyst. You're not really supervising people in the traditional sense. The captains are like sergeants, and then the captains go straight to the chief, right, of OMAP, or their section head. So I go there as a sergeant. They don't have a place for me to sit. Every single cubicle is taken. I have to sit in different people's desks while they're off. And I don't want to be there. I'd rather be back in the 8-3 on patrol, or I was hoping I was going to get some kind of good operational unit out of this education I got. And guess what the first project they give me is? Do an analysis of how there's not enough sergeants on patrol and where we can take sergeants up to get more sergeants on patrol. I'm like, right here? Right here, everybody.
Are they using that analysis right now?
They might be. So that was one of my first jobs, was to do that. And I didn't even have a desk to sit in, right? So I thought that was kind of ironic. It ended up, it's Groundhog Day. It's boring. You're working in an office. It's not what I signed up for. Like everywhere I've gone on this job, I've met phenomenal people who work everywhere, right? Who are just like, they are great. They're there either because they're super smart. Maybe they have a family situation. Maybe they just wanted to get out of a command, right? It doesn't make them a bad person. Like I can still laugh with you and have a good conversation. So that's where I was as a sergeant, and then lieutenant test came up. I had already been studying for it, and again, I would not retain people, but I did. I will be fully transparent. I did end up staying as a lieutenant. They offered me to stay, and I was like, you know what? The captain's test is out now, and this will be a good place. I'm sorry, when I said the lieutenant's test was coming up, I had already taken the lieutenant's test. I was on the list, and I was studying for the captain's test. So I was studying for the captain's test. They offered me to stay. There was a little bit of overtime. I'm like, you know what? You're going to go to a command. They're going to make you the admin lieutenant because you're going to come from OMAP, and they're going to say, there's my admin lieutenant. I'm doing the same work in a command. So I stayed and then went on from there to be a captain in 2 years because I did well on the test. So you were asking about education, though. I'm sorry, I got a little off track.
No. It's great. I think it's great. I mean, why not? Let's continue about your education. I think it's great because one, you're studying and you're getting promoted throughout your career. You're in OMAP, you're doing analysis, and you're also expanding your academia, which I think is outstanding. So I'm curious, right? As you became a cop and you went through the ranks and you're studying for civil service exams, and you're also doing OMAP analysis, and you go to CompStat, right? Because you have to do your own research for CompStat and Burrowstat, and along with research, of course, crime analysis, what they do. But did these experiences, being a cop and all these experiences, did that change how you did research as you went through academia? And the reason why I say that is because for me, I learned in the military, they taught you how to learn. So did these experiences change how you approach research, getting your Ph.D.? Did any of these factors help or change how you approach your research?
Oh, definitely. Right. Especially when I went on to get my Ph.D., which I'll tell you about that. it does. It changes the way you look at things analytically, right? You're supposed to take emotion out of it, really look at things more from the third person perspective. But yet, every researcher ultimately is deciding what they're going to study, why they're going to study it, how they're going to approach it, right? So having the knowledge coming from the job about how the job works, the culture, right? Organizational climate, the differences in leadership, it all merges together, right? So that I can apply the analytical skills that I learned in school, but I do it through like a policing lens, which is unique, right? To be able to do both of those. But you did ask about going on to get my PhD and sort of how the career happened. So when I was in the 6-6, I was obviously going through that, that time. It was turmoil, trying to manage everything. And one of the biggest problems, the community, the 6-6 is very diverse. People think of just Orthodox Jewish people, which is the heart of Borough Park, right? But there's a big Pakistani population. There's a big Asian population. There's a big Italian population, right, over in the southern half. Maybe not as big as it used to be, and peppered in throughout, right? So one of the biggest issues, though, was radio silence from headquarters when that whole controversy happened. Not getting a lot of direction. People, listen, we were navigating. I always said, like, I'm on the ship deck, right? I'm the captain of the ship, but all my navigation systems went complete black. I'm not getting much messaging from high up. Very minimal from the borough, but some. None from 1PP. And all those phone calls that certain members of the community had to call up to, the top brass, they couldn't make those calls anymore. They had to deal with just me, which in a way was good. Yep. But they also, because they were not happy with necessarily the way things were going with the city and not having the same access or receptivity to things that they wanted, who did they go after? El Capitan, right? Because they wanted to show that people higher up, well, you have to listen to us because these are the things that will go wrong if you don't, right? So I'll give you an example. Just at one point, like, patrol taking a long time to take on a call, right? I mean, these things happen in every command, especially when there's backlogs, busy. And yeah, you can call me. I will speak to the sergeants. You can call the sergeants, right, and speak to them, and they'll address it, right? But no, we want to make a federal case out of it, and we want to go to the top brass and show how things are not working the way they're supposed to. So I'm in that world, and I get this phone call, and it's from a friend of mine, and he says, hey, I got to ask you something, but Kathy Perez, the Deputy Commissioner of Administration, is looking at you. She's looking for a CO of office, and she wants to know if you would talk to her. So I'm like, I don't know who that is, but sure, I'll talk to somebody. And at this point, I've been in the 6-6 2 years. And again, it's like these little fires I'm putting out. That's like, what's going to happen? So I call her, and she tells me about this unit, this Deputy Commissioner of Administration, which is really at the time in charge of a few subunits, but part of its main mission was to look at the department and sort of break down communication barriers between the bureaus. If you remember, Bratton at the time was talking about how there's a lot of silos in the department and people aren't talking to each other. So transit's not talking to patrol, patrol's not talking to, counterterrorism. So that was part of it. And the other thing was to really try to plug in with the rank and file and see what needs to be done on the job. So this is 2016. They had already done a lot of work, revitalized the precincts, right? The SUVs on patrol. I apologize if you can hear my dog. I don't know if you guys.
That's fine. Don't worry. We got dogs.
Sorry about that.
My guard dog comes out sometimes.
Yeah.
She's obviously somebody's delivering a package, I guess. So anyway, to really sort of tune in with the rank and file, because the one thing about the Kelly administration, right, it was very top down. So the idea between this administration, Perez tells me, is to really sort of try to tap into the rank and file and figure out what in the job needs to change and to plug in. And she tells me about a lot of the stuff they're doing. And so I was like, yeah, I'll come down and I'll talk to you. And listen, Kathy Perez is, from my point of view, and a lot, right? She is a visionary. She worked for Bratton as a sergeant, in his office. She took him back. He took her back when she came back again as a confidant, right? But she thinks outside the box, because she's not a traditional, I went from, police officer up to 3-star chief, and I've gotten all these disconnects in between. So when I met her and I said, morale, this is something I've always thought is sort of missing on this job, because I love this job. I loved going out on patrol, but you see other people get beat down. I've gotten beaten down myself, right? But you see people get beaten down and how it changes them, right? I mean, it's a phenomenon that I've studied, that I've learned about, right? Cynicism, right? Just we get this negative worldview, and bosses get a negative worldview, and they think the cops are all scamming, and the cops are, trying to get over on the system, right? And I met Kathy Perez, and I said, this is different. I said, you know what? Yes, sign me up. I'll do it, right? So I went there to work for her, and shortly thereafter, they sent out for execs to go to this thing called Police Management Institute. It's a program run by Columbia University. They take the top executives from within the department, and you go 1 week a month for about a year. And it's not taught by cops. It's taught by the faculty of Columbia Business School. And they teach, like different personnel issues. They teach budgeting, and they teach this thing called strategic visioning, which is all about what we've been talking about, having a vision for the organization and your unit that transcends you. So it will continue even once you're gone. And I went to this program and I said, shit, I wish I had this when I was the CO of the 6-6, like when I actually had a command with a lot of people under me. Because now working for a deputy commissioner, they call you a CO, but you're really chief of staff, right? Because you have the subunits, but they report to the deputy commissioner. All the powers going through the deputy commissioner. You're managing the staff, which was about 8 people, to go from a command of 150 down to 8 people. But yet you have the ear of somebody who has the ear of the police commissioner, right? A top advisor. So with PMI, when I sat through this program, I said to myself, policing needs more of this. Policing needs a little bit more outside thinking. A little bit, how do businesses do it? How do businesses manage people when they can quit and they can just go and work someplace else and they're not trapped by a 20-year pension? And so that was why I decided to go back and get my Ph.D., because I started saying to myself, well, number one, these professors at Columbia look like they got it pretty good. This doesn't seem like a bad gig for when I'm done with this place, when I'm done with NYPD. This looks like a pretty good lifestyle, right? Teaching, whatever. But what they're teaching, that's really important, and we need more of that. So that's where I got this idea, and then that was 2017. By 2019, I had applied. John Jay has a PhD program, one of the very few where you can work and go to school part-time at nighttime, and it is all covered. The costs are covered by John Jay and by CUNY. Right. So the department does not pay for you to go. You owe the department nothing when you're done. This is something that the school, any student who gets into their PhD program is covered under a fellowship, under the idea that you're advancing higher education. So nobody pays. You just pay it's like a $200 like technology fee. You pay like once a semester or something. Because I thought about law school, but law school, you either got to get a scholarship or pay. And probably like most of you guys, right? I'm like, I can't take this kind of money out of my family budget for my own needs, right? I got kids I got to put through college. I'm not going to do that. So I went to John Jay. The first 3 years I was working full time. And then the last 2 years I was running my time because I built up so much time as an inspector, and I finished up my Ph.D.
That is impressive. That is impressive. Outstanding. You know, John, you got any questions?
Yeah. So at what point do you say, all right, I'm going to wrap it up and I'm going to go full time into education? At like what point do you say, like, when do you know you're done with the job? When do you say, all right, I'm going to leave. I'm going to retire. And then what's that transition into the education world, into academia?
So I kind of knew that I wanted to move outside the city once my kids got to a certain age, right? Like, I mean, I liked living in Staten Island. It's great, right? But like I grew up in New Jersey. I just wanted more. I wanted something I'd get more real estate, right? Even though I had a nice house in Staten Island, right? I wanted some place where the kids could ride their bikes out in the street, right? We wouldn't have to worry. They can go hiking in the woods and stuff. So that meant one of two things. Either I was going to move to Orange County and stay on the job forever, right? Or I was going to look to leave. And then in 2019, Deputy Commissioner Administration had morphed a little bit, right? Kathy Perez actually left shortly thereafter. And then Bob Ganley came in to be the Deputy Commissioner, former Vice President of the SBA. Right. And so he's coming in. So I said, okay, my time's gone. I'm leaving. I'm going back to patrol. Right. This is over. So I sat down with him. We had a nice conversation. And I figured this guy's vice president of the SBA. He probably got a long list of people who are kissing his tushy, who want my job. I'm like, I had a good run. Right. So I sit down with him and I said, listen, I go, it's all good. I just want you to know, like, I'm not here because I'm afraid of being out there. If you got a guy and you want to give them the spot, totally understand. No hard feelings, right? I'd like to go back to Brooklyn South. And so he's like, well, you know what? You're just the type of guy I need. I need a guy who's in here, but isn't afraid of being out there. And I want some continuity. Like, I like what was being done. Like because administration worked with the unions, but behind the scenes, right? Because labor relations, there's all kinds of rules and formal policies. But if, with this new Deputy Commissioner Administration, if the unions had something that they didn't want to necessarily, it was legit, but rather than go through this long drawn out formal process, let's just solve the problem, then they would come to us. So, Bob Ganley asked me to stay on, which I was happy to do and work for him, right? But then in 2019, our mission morphed a little bit because we had that spike in suicides. And then I'm in on these meetings, and that was right around really when I started to go for my PhD. But it was just the timing of it all. I was going for my PhD to focus on officer morale and how it affects police performance, how they deal with the community. Because listen, let's face it, we know that when cops are getting shit on, what do? They go out, and you're not giving service with a smile at that point, right? I mean, you're living in a horrible world. So that's what I went in on my PhD starting to study. But then we had that spike in suicides where we hit 10 in 1 year. Normally it's about 4, a bad year is 5, right? And a lot of them were done by, were completed by April. So I saw the job really shift into high gear to focus on that. And that was how my studies kind of swerved more into the mental health area, right? And now they're swerving more towards the recruitment and the retention area, because I think that's the largest issue facing the job. That's since I graduated.
Since what? Okay,
No, I think I didn't answer exactly when I decided I was going to leave. So all of these things were sort of coming together, and I really sort of decided in 2021 that I wasn't going to go upstate, because why should I keep my pension? At one point, Steve Silks was one of our completed suicides back there in 2019, and that's why I went down this issue, because I kind of looked at it and I said to myself, I started looking at some of the higher chiefs, and it's like, wow, that's scary that this guy really, may have taken his own life because he didn't want to do anything other than be a chief on this job. And that's when I started saying to myself, I need to line something else up, because I don't want to become that institutionalized. I'm sure it was hard for you guys transitioning to retirement. It was very hard for me to transition to retirement, right? I mean, I'm still going through it. And I think to myself, if I was 62 doing this, oh my God, like, what are you doing? So that's,
I always say retirement was thrust on me, so I wasn't really ready for it at 7 days. So I was like,
I think it was the best thing that happened to me.
Yeah.
It was the best thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it is good. I miss it though. I tell you, the thought has gone through my mind. I actually took the test to become I'm a certified police officer in Pennsylvania. I'm Act 120. You can take a test. You can take a test for anybody who's really miserable with the NYPD. You can actually take a test through the PA State Police, get certified, move out here, get a job as a cop out here. But then I said, you know what? You're living in the past, man, because you're romanticizing things, and you get in a patrol car out here after you worked in the NYPD. I think you might be sorely disappointed. And
you missed the guys. You missed that feeling, right? The guys, the whole community, that camaraderie.
I miss that feeling that when you were, and I miss it from when I was a cop, right? When you're in a car and you hear that radio crackle up, and you're not getting the location yet, but that the stuff is on somewhere, and you got a fellow cop out there who needs help, right? Just that surge of adrenaline you get, and then running to get there to try to help them,
Oh yeah.
And then when you're a boss, I always say the sign of, that you've achieved success when you're a boss, when the shit is at the fan and you show up and you see the sigh of relief in your guy's eyes that you're there. That's when you're a success.
Well, that's because you were a man of character. And Mike Freed said earlier, you were a true success. Since we're talking about education and recruitment, I think this all ties it together. I think this is appropriate to ask. What do you think the impacts of academia are on policing, and what do you think the unintentional effects that make policing difficult? And the reason why I bring that up is right now there's an issue, and it's always been an issue. It's always been a conversation. Should new recruits have to have college background, right? It was 60 credits. Now I think it's 28 credits or something like that. Do you believe that it's necessary? Do you think there's a place for academia in policing? Do you think that college requirement is necessary or not necessary for recruitment? What are your thoughts on that? Especially someone that made it to the Ph.D.
Yeah. Well, I'd be out of a job if I said I didn't think a college degree was needed. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, put you on the spot on that
university. I think that certain life experiences can build up that, I don't necessarily think you have to have a 4-year degree to be a great cop, right? But I don't think many 20-year-olds can be a great cop without having some sort of life experience. I just don't think you're mature enough, right? I mean, for the most part. Although I look back to when I was 22, I was like, oh my God, I look at 22-year-olds now. I'm like, I can't believe, right? I had a gun. I was patrolling the streets of New York City when I was this guy's age. But there's a great scene. If you ever watch the show Tulsa King with Sylvester Stallone.
I don't know what you're talking about.
By the way. That show is awesome.
When he's in the car with his driver, it was a young guy, and the guy says something about college, and Sylvester Stallone says, you know what college is about? College is about showing and proving to your future employer that you can take directions, that you can show up, that you can be responsible, that you can actually think about some stuff, and you can make a decision. So I think college is important because I think from a policy standpoint, it's very hard to decipher who's going to be a good candidate, right? I think the 2-year mark was probably good because a lot of guys who just really wanted to do it, it showed that they were willing to, get those credits, whatever. I've worked with cops who didn't have any degree and they were great. But I think when you're looking at it from a policy standpoint, how do we make sure that we get somebody who's, level-headed, they have some discipline, they're willing to follow instructions. They should be able to read and write English. You don't have to be a poet, right? But I don't want a 61 that I can't read, right? Or communications, even over the radio, how to speak. Because even as a patrol cop, right, you could have to get on scene and do public speaking and tell people what you need them to do. You need to persuade them. So in college, you're prepared for some of that more than the average bear. But I think if you have, good work experience, it could be too. I wish the NYPD was small enough that it could exercise a greater degree of common sense. But unfortunately, this aircraft carrier, right, turns slowly and it needs policy to do it. That's why I think it was a mistake going back from the 60 college credits.
What do you think though now? So you do these, you get into this research, right? Are they surveys? Like what would you say that you're doing now as related to the job? Like you're in academia, right? You're in the academia world. And I think it's a good thing because I read a lot of books on policing. I read the guy who's on Mondani's transition and team, The End of Policing, Vitali. I read his book and I was like, it's theory based, right? But a lot of what I read your study, and that's why I reached out, is I read your initial study that I believe the Gothamist put out, or maybe the city, I'm not sure. It was the initial study on where it said how many people want to leave. Like what made you get involved into doing that study? And I think a lot of the points you were hitting, I could see like a police mind behind it, not just an academia mind. So like what pushed you to start like engaging in this? Was there like an oh shit moment, or like did you read something in the paper? Did you see something, or is this something you were always curious about? Like what made you start on the initial one that starts to get media attention or whatever?
Well, yeah, I mean, so as far as the recruitment and retention, right? I mean, it was basically reading stories, in the newspaper, talking to my friends on the job, talking to people leading up, right? A lot of people thinking about leaving the job. I mean, it's a great job, but it's amazing how many people are miserable in it, right? And I think some of that is because they lose sight of their purpose. They get really, and they don't get treated well. I mean, by management, a lot of times, right? By management and even by your peers, right? Because sometimes we start shitting on each other because we don't feel how good, we don't feel good. So we're sort of taking it off around the people around us. So I've always been interested in that, right? Ever since I was a cop in the 7-0. And I saw the transition in the 7-0 as well, from going to be like a really tight command where everybody knew each other. And then honestly, the Operation Impact, it drove down crime, but it crushed morale because now you got like, you're changing next to, they were putting every 6 months, a new 150 rookies into the command. You can't even, they used to do the field training. I came out, I was with a group of 18, I think. Right. And they put us in 2 different squads. Now you're getting 100+ cops to flood the impact zone, and they're telling them stay away from those senior guys, right? You would try to say a foot post would come over and ask for an administrative 85. You're right around the corner. You're like, yeah, Central, I'll go over there. Impact sergeant, have that unit disregard. And they're coming out from the station house to come to answer the guy's question because they don't want a senior cop talking to them. So I saw morale, being an issue from the beginning. We all get that great feeling when we see that Heroes video, right? Like, I've always wanted to know, how do we package that video and somehow put it in everybody's pocket so they can take it out on the street with them? So that's always been my number one main concern. And that's why I started my PhD program, really trying to look at morale. Then morale and mental health are related, man. I mean, if you're not feeling good about your job, you're not in a good headspace, right? Especially when you take a career like ours, where you sacrificed a lot and continue to sacrifice a lot. So if you don't feel good about what you're doing, it's going to affect what you do. And then the recruitment retention, I mean, I guess I got to give it to the press, podcasts, right? Everybody was talking about it. And I said, I got to study this. First off, like, let's see, is it a problem? Because you're not getting data from the NYPD on this, right? They're not going to give it to you. Do they even do exit interviews? I know there's a policy for exit interviews. And if there is a data set, you're not getting.
I can answer that right now. We've had plenty of people on here that left, and the answer is no. They're not doing any exit interviews. No.
And I mean, so that's where I dove into that world, John and Eric, because I said, the department's not giving the data. The media is putting up anecdotal stories of individual cops, which, hey, I'm hearing them too. But let's get our mind on, you can't address a problem until you actually measure it and make sure there is a problem, or what are we looking at, right? So that's why, I designed the surveys and said, I'm going to go right to the source and ask the cops themselves.
And just real quick, because I think I in particular put out a little misinformation about those studies, and people are asking here, are you able to tell individual officers who answered in those studies?
No, because they don't even put their name in. Now,
gotcha.
Could I drill? I mean, if I knew and I wanted to say, like, I know there's only let's say one African-American lieutenant in the 6th precinct, then I wanted to drill down and see if he answered. Maybe, but I'm not, number one, I'm not interested in that. And number two, ethically, that would be a violation of ethics, right? Because as researchers, we're obligated under ethics. So they don't fill out their name. A lot of them, and the one thing while we're talking about it, a lot of cops are very reluctant to give their demographic data.
Yep.
Which I totally understand. Again, that cop mind, you're going to figure out who I am. You're going to tell the job. The job is not getting this data set, right? This is property. This is property of me under John Jay College, and they won't be able to get it, right? That's number one. But the thing about the demographic data, you have to have it in order to run. So we really got like over 3,000 responses, but because only 1,800 filled out every caption and gave their demographic data, that's what we can use, because otherwise we don't know. So we have to control, when we run the analysis, we have to control for race. We have to control for time on the job. We have to control for rank. The command we didn't control for. So I would have to look at my notes and see if we even collected it. I'm not even sure if we collected the command, but we did collect like race, time on the job, rank, because that could impact the result, right? I mean, and it does. We know that if you're a sergeant or a lieutenant, you're more likely to be satisfied than if you're a cop, which makes sense, right? We know that morale takes a dip, right, in the middle of the officer's career, and then tends to go up around year 20. Because if you're sticking around, I hope you like it.
One of our friends and listeners in the chat, Sarah Connors 12345. I got to push back on this one. So she says there are always exit interviews. Hold on, these chats are flying in here. Says there are always exit interviews at the command level. It's part of the paperwork package. Now, yes, Sarah, I agree. It's part of the paperwork package, but the actual interview is not always conducted. I mean, we had John DeGlazer here last week. He went and became a doctor, and he had no exit interview. Why would he lie about that? But with that being said, Ken, I have to say, I think, it's really interesting that your your study was done after the contract. So I'm curious, right? From an academic standpoint and from a police perspective standpoint, what do you think pay and a contract in real time has an effect on your study as far as people staying, leaving, and morale?
I don't know if the raise really impacted the study or not. And to be fully transparent, right? It's not like we had the data set before and then we retested after, right? So everything I've done so far is like a fixed, like cross-sectional design, they call it, where you take a fixed point in time and you pull the data, right? I'm not like resurveying people over time. That can be very useful, but it's very problematic in policing where people are reluctant to tell you who they are so that you can assign them an anonymous number and you can compare their results over time, right? Is part of it. Also just trying to do the collection. It's not so easy. So financial was a factor in satisfaction. In other words, grouping it together, not just the pay, but the benefits and the retirement, it did lead to higher levels of job satisfaction and lower levels of turnover, like intent, saying that they're looking to leave the NYPD. But other factors, right? And so to get to your question, Eric, I think, yeah, when cops get a raise, right, does morale take a boost? I would say it probably does. I know times that we got a raise, we felt better about what we were doing. How long lasting is it?
Couple of weeks.
I don't know. Money's relative.
Short term, right?
For me personally,
I'm still eating mac and cheese like I was when I first got on the job. I
think it lasts so after they pay their credit cards off, and then when they start building debt again, I think it goes right back.
Yeah, exactly. But the biggest factor was, and we did find results that impacted it. You know, I get really distressed because I know what it's like to be a cop, to be a sergeant, to be whatever. And your days off, you want those days off, right? I mean, you like those RDOs, and there's nothing worse than leaving and signing out on a Friday for a 3-day swing, and you get hit with like 8 hours on a Sunday, right? When you were planning on going away with your girlfriend or whatever for a 3-day weekend, and now you got to try to find somebody. And of course, they're like, well, don't complain to me. Try to find somebody to take it from you, right? And then you're like wheeling and dealing and this and that. And that happened to me. But that did not happen to me as much as it's happening to the cops today. And I don't know if it got better since Tish took over. I would say, well, I don't know. You guys talk to the rank and file more than I do. Okay. That is a major factor. And you know what? That goes right into mental health. If you're not giving people some time off to recharge and to rejuvenate, right? You're making this job the only thing that they have, which we know is detrimental to their mental health. The first thing we teach in mental health and resiliency, which I've taught a lot, is you got to have outside interests. You have to have a life outside this job. So my research confirmed that work-life balance is a major reason why officers are looking to leave the NYPD. So, I mean, and it shouldn't be hard, right? We talked a little bit about CompStat. We talked about data. Tish is a big data person. That was her claim to fame, right? And she did it. She revolutionized the department in 2013. She gave us all cell phones. She got rid of the typewriters, right? If she wants to monitor how much officers are working, if she wants to look at why people are leaving, she knows how to do it. She's done it. If they are doing it, it's definitely behind closed doors because I haven't heard anything about them doing it or looking at it.
So
go ahead, John.
So like I'm gonna make like a biased statement here because it's just my observation and it's not based on a survey. It's just based on what I've seen and who I've spoken to. And like I think mental health and morale always an issue in policing. But when I look at law enforcement like across the board, like nationwide, I really see like I call it defund the police through attrition. And I see it everywhere. I see cops are leaving at rates I've never seen. Just when we talk about the New York City Police Department, since 21 and really into 22, excuse me, since like early 22 and on, we've never seen this amount of people retire early or vest out than we have. And that includes the basic retirements, but they blame that. They defend that on the bigger classes, right? And there were bigger classes. They're saying, oh, but like I traditionally know people that wanted to stay longer and left due to the working conditions. So so I'm going to ask you, and I'm not asking you from a professional standpoint. I'm just asking you personally and from your biased own opinion. Like, do you think that morale is worse now? Like, why are we seeing this level of attrition now and we had it in the past? And I'm not asking you from an academia standpoint. I'm just asking you on a personal, like, why do you think we're seeing that? We're not just seeing it in the NYPD. We're seeing it like across the board. Like when you look at anywhere, everyone's talking about it. Oh, we want to do more with less. I'm not getting days off. I'm getting forced overtime, or our services are completely diminished because we don't have the cops and nobody wants to take the job. And I think, all the things that have been highlighted in this past, even just week, all of the horrible incidents, every mayor and every police chief has cited attrition as a problem and lack of manpower. Like, do you think it's worse now, or is it just we're in this time? Like, what's your opinion on that?
Oh, I think undeniably it's worse now, especially with attrition, right? I mean, we see, like you said, you see officers. My first survey, right, for mass exodus, the article that you spoke about, right, almost 23% of cops fell into one of two categories. Either like I'm extremely dissatisfied with the NYPD and I am actively looking to leave the profession, or I'm extremely dissatisfied with the NYPD and I'm looking to go to another agency and will do so as soon as possible, right? I mean, guys have always gone to Nassau and Suffolk, right? Especially if they lived out there, right? They pay better. They're always going to pay better, right? The working conditions are probably better, right? But you had something if you stayed in the NYPD, right? You had that pride. You had that, oh, this is no shit. We're the NYPD. Like, we are like the premier municipal police agency. You got respect wherever you went. And I think you still, at least out here in Pennsylvania where I am now, you still get respect. Like, they hear your NYPD, from whether it's cops, civilians, you do. But the perception, out in the media is just like, and it's happened since George Floyd. Maybe we could say, has it gotten any better? But that, yeah, the NYPD is a bunch of bullies. They violate people's rights. They kill innocent people, right? They're not doing mental health right. They're not doing the homeless right? And that has an effect. That has an effect on people when they go to work. I think it has an effect, John. It does not show up. That effect does not show up as much as the perceived lack of support from leadership shows up in the research. Because I think, listen, you become a cop, you always knew that there was going to be an element of society that doesn't like you. You kind of expect that some members of the public are not going to like you. Some are. Most people just go about their day, right? And you're an annoyance if you come upon them, or they're very respectful. They're very nice. Right. But you don't expect as much as you get from management. You don't expect all the days off canceled with no apparent regard for your personal time, mental health, like no consideration. And it gets to people after a while. Right. I would call it organizational cynicism. You start to feel like, I bust my ass and here they go canceling my days off again. They don't care about me. But in reality, it's not that, the job becomes so amorphous, right? This entity and it happens in every organization, right? Where the company, but with policing, I feel like because you put so much on the line and it becomes so much of your persona, right? Being a cop becomes so much of your persona and so much of who you are. you expect that to be reciprocated from the organization, and it really hurts when you don't get it.
Ken, I think I really have to push back a little bit. At the same point, I'm happy to hear that you've had a good experience in Pennsylvania, because I've traveled it's nice to hear that, because I traveled the entire country and I've been to almost every state, and I'm finding more and more disappointment with the NYPD by other cops and by just police enthusiasts. And a lot of times I get from police enthusiasts, they'll say to me when they find out I'm NYPD, former NYPD retired, they'll say, wow, what's going on in that city? And then a lot of times what I hear from other cops is like, damn, it's embarrassing seeing some of those videos of cops getting their asses kicked quite often. So that same mystique that we used to have, and I know the difference because I went to New Orleans in August of 2005 in support of Hurricane Katrina with the job. And I went down there when we got pulled over by Virginia State Police, and we were rock stars back then. We were rock stars in New Orleans. Like, everybody was like, wow, you're NYPD. Like, they loved us. I mean, it was like we could walk on water. And then in comparison to now, the way that people feel about us, and at least in my experience from out of state, is far different from then. And so I think that does play a role in morale. It's really disappointing. I think we can't hide the fact that the mystique and I think I always say this, I think the NYPD was the GOAT of policing, and I don't think it is right now. I think we could get back to that. And I think a lot of it is leadership. What are your thoughts about leadership and how that impacts morale?
Oh, well, first off, Eric, just to get back to, what people tell me in Pennsylvania, for full transparency, I teach leadership for Penn State. And because, basically out here for smaller departments, they send their cops for leadership training. And then if you want to be a chief, you can get the executive training. So I guess most of the feedback I'm getting from cops, I'm in the instructor role. So maybe they don't want to give me the open, honest feedback like you. I might not sign off on their slip for the certification. So just maybe Eric gets more open and honest feedback than I do about that. But I think leadership and morale and wellness, I mean, it's like the trifecta of a triangle, right? You can't have one without the other. I mean, I had the privilege of working for bosses that I would run through a brick wall for. Like, I would do anything for this guy or gal, right? Men and women alike. I worked for excellent, bosses in both genders, right? And that makes a difference, right? It absolutely does. I remember as a cop in the 7-0 getting a robbery collar, and my sergeant heard about it. And I always tell the story for leadership training. He got the facts from me of what happened. I'm in the station house. I'm processing the arrest. He grabs me by the hand, takes me into the CO's office, and says, "Quick just got a fantastic robbery collar over on Bedford Avenue," and blah, 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 blah. And the guy, he didn't even know what, he was totally thrown off because he just walked into the office. He looked up and he was like, "Oh, that's awesome. Good job, Quick." He shook my hand and everything. But I say, but for that sergeant doing that, feeling comfortable enough that he could do it. And then, when I'm teaching leadership, I'm also what else he was doing? He was also making himself look good, because he showed that he was willing to recognize his people, stand up for his people, and bring it to the attention of his boss, right? So I think that morale, that you can't separate those three things: morale, leadership, and wellness. It's all amongst the same thing. And we saw it back in 2019 with the NYPD when we started to really try to dive into these suicides and see. And that back then, that was what a lot of officers were complaining about, was the leadership.
Yeah, but still, we weren't seeing it. We weren't seeing people really just leave, and we weren't seeing the younger people leave also. That. That's the thing that I think is no one's looking at. When I look at the NYPD overall, I see this huge emphasis on hiring. Right? Oh, well, we're just going to keep bringing in new people, and they're kind of throwing it. If you were hired yesterday, you're already forgotten news. Like, we already got you. We already met. You're here. If you don't like it, leave. And I see that, and I really think it's failing, and I think it's like a failing mentality, because the emphasis should be on the people you have, cultivating that experience, keeping retained knowledgeable people, and then having them go into the ranks of leadership. Because look, the thing is, like, we sit there and knock training constantly, right? But the NYPD, it's a hard organization to give the people the right amount of training that they actually require. So the real training comes from out in the field. It comes from each other, right? Like, we teach each other. And I think that's why we're starting to lose, is because we're losing all of these people, these experienced people. And even that kid with just 3 years on the job that's going to another agency or going, what, this career is not for me. I don't want to be here anymore. And is there anything that like, from doing this study that has like came out, or that you think the NYPD could adopt to help retain people, help like keep experienced, knowledgeable people to get through? Because you study, it was very interesting. I thought that the part that like really stuck out to me, it's like, all right, people take the job for the pension. Like, everybody comes on for the pension and the benefits, but money's not what keeps them going. And yet, if I look across the board at the news, or I look at the unions, it's solely based on money. And I get it. They got to fight for you guys, and you want to make more money. We could all use more money. But that's not the factor that helps their morale. That's not what retains them. Like, is there anything that you think that, like, or just from based on your research, that could be done to help what's happening, to help stop, like, just be like, hey, nobody leave yet. Like, what is there anything like couple of things like?
Well, I mean, I think there are certain things, right, that could definitely be done, right? I mean, I think, like, I look at, like, Commissioner Tisch, right? I mean, she wears it on her sleeve, right? The commitment to crime, the commitment to quality of life, right? Like she talks about it everywhere she goes. You see, what you don't see is, you don't see a lot of recognition for the men and women who are out there getting that mission achieved, right? I mean, I always think, like, when we talk about officer wellness, it's either everything or it's nothing. Like, we either need to focus on the people that are doing the job and support them. So a lot of it is about messaging, about speaking, but then, we want to also follow that up, right? I mean, right now, I think that it appears to me like they are stretched so thin, and they want to keep trying to solve things the old-fashioned way, which is to flood with a lot of personnel, right? Like, we saw that in transit when they had that transit initiative, and guys were getting, like, days off canceled, doubles, extended tour, whatever it was. And that really drives down, people's morale. There's nothing. What's worse than getting the notification on your 3-day swing is when you get it to do something that in your mind is kind of pointless, right? Like, go and stand on this foot post where nobody stood in the past, like, however many months, right? And just stand there, right? I think that guys really hate that. I did it. We all did it. But there was light at the end of the tunnel, and they don't see any light. I have guys who were detectives that were getting thrown out after George Floyd for the same thing. Again, George Floyd protest, COVID, precinct coverage. Like, these are things that hopefully you realize you're a police officer and you swore an oath, and the city needs you, but it's not really getting said, right? I know people who went from COVID, right? They got taken off their investigation to go backfill in a precinct that there was twice as many cops as there normally is on any day. And they get told, well, I don't know, I guess go stand out on this foot post on the street. Okay, well, what am I supposed to do? What's going on? Well, just stand there. Well, if you need me to ride in a sector car to answer 911 calls, I'll do it. And that's the job I signed up for, right? If so many people are sick in that command that other people have to fill. But that's not what this is. This is, you're throwing extra people into the precinct, and then you're putting them out on foot posts that they've never been. And that really goes against people's morale. So, I mean, they need to, I personally think we really need to take a look at what is the breaking point for the average cop. What is the sweet spot of this much overtime is optimal, but like once you get past this threshold, it becomes detrimental. And we need to set some sort of metric. I realize people are going to say, well, we can never account for what goes on in policing. All right. Well, God forbid there's like a 9/11 or a COVID or something like this. You get like a mayoral, like emergency, right? That the mayor declares an emergency. Then we order people in on top of it. But until then, we're going to obligate to our personnel that we are not going to make you work more than 40 hours a month overtime. Like it's not going to happen. I think that might help.
I want to thank you. We're 2 hours into this, and I want to thank you for taking your time. We value your time, and so do our friends and listeners. Are you good for a couple more questions?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Outstanding. We appreciate you taking the time out and really diving into
No, I mean, listen, this is why I got into academia, was really to try to shine a light on you can't be a prophet in your hometown, right? So it was really to shine light. But the people who are on here, this is the people who I'm trying to shine light on issues that are going unnoticed or that society doesn't realize what's really driving it.
What do you think about? So we talked about morale. We talked about moving around, like these mobile field forces. I feel that affects morale, right? If you're in the 3-4 precinct, you're constantly being sent to different precincts. You have to get your gear, and just that constant change does impact, especially when you're doing constant overtime. But I also think that too much stability makes someone stale, and I think that, in my opinion, I haven't done a study on it, but my opinion, I think that every 3 to 5 years, I think there should be people who should be moving out of their commands to different commands. And I think that would give people a fresh start and a fresh look at things. What are your thoughts on that? Like, some people stay in one precinct for 20 years. What are your thoughts on moving people around as far as for morale? Have you done studies on that? And if not, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, well, there's no studies on that I'm aware of. But I would agree with you, Eric, but I would also caution that it's a double-edged sword, right? Because there's a lot of people, you get comfortable, you get happy. Now you start moving people. Where are we moving them from, right? Are we taking them from the 6-6 and putting them in the 4-6, right? Like, I do think that, like, especially with some roles, right? I mean, there's a policy, right, on the books that you can't be an anti-crime for more than 5 years or something like that, right? But we've all seen that doesn't really get upheld. I think from a personal point of view, what you're saying is very good, but I just don't see it as a policy being something that the department could do. And I think it would probably be more detrimental. But part of what we did when we looked at health and wellness and stuff is trying to create something that's more voluntary and more like encouragement based, right? So like encouraging officers, you feel stale, you feel stuck, you look at this unit, but then it's very hard to navigate. So it's very hard to, number one, navigate. It's hard to get to different places. So I think that and this has been something they've been trying for a while, right? The mutual transfers, or even like have a set career path. These are things that come up time and time again that should not be as hard as apparently it is, because the department's never really done it, made a good career path program so that people can forecast and see, right? Like a transfer system where you can actually see, like, where am I in this queue? Like, when is this going to happen? Right? I just like submit like a transfer and it goes into a black hole. I don't even really know, and I think that some of that was changed, but I don't know how much they're sticking to it.
Yeah, I'll be honest. Like, everyone I talk to, lieutenants, sergeants, first grade detectives, second grade detectives, third grade detectives, young cops, middle cops, they all hate mobile field force. And they all hate mobile field force because they all say the same thing. They all have that feeling. It's pointless. Now, I totally agree with you because I remember I traditionally always had 2 days off because I was always in like a specialized anti-crime or conditions. So I remember getting hit on my last day and I have to break the news to my wife or my girlfriend or my friends. And I hated it. I'm like, this sucks. And so the knock now is, but those things, like you said, they weren't as frequent. This is weekly. This is happening to everybody on the job, right? Young and old. It's happening to everybody. Blessed career, not so blessed career. Know people, don't know people. Everybody is going out, basically. 99% are going out on this mobile field force. And they all say the same thing. I don't do anything when I'm there. I've never wrote a summons. I've never arrested anybody. I've never took a 61. I don't even interact with anyone. I'm standing on a foot post in the middle of nowhere, and I don't understand what I'm doing. And I've been doing this over and over and over again. And, traditionally, we used to have in the NYPD was like seasons, right? Like you knew your busy seasons. You knew in the beginning of summer, you were going to be out of parades. Every parade's coming. You're probably going to be getting hit on those weekends. But then after that time, what happened? You'd get a little break through the winter. There wouldn't be as many details. Now it's, not only did we add all these protests, these thousands and thousands of protests that they're getting hit with, which you're going to have to cover because you understand you're a police officer, but these mobile field force and then that transit plan, it really is crushing morale. And I think something should be looked at in that port and like in that portion. And I really think like, and I don't think it's even for like for an academia study. I think it's for the job. I think they should really double down and look to see how effective has this been? Has this brought down crime in the places that we are? What have these cops actually like? What have taxpayers gained from us spending all this money and destroying our own staff? And to me, that I think has really been a multiplier in the amount of people that have been leaving. That's been the force multiplier, I believe. When I look at it, like what are your thoughts about the way mobile field force is? Should it be just a constant, or do you think it should be utilized as things spike?
Well, yeah, John, I'm glad you brought that up because when you talk about like things that the job could do to probably increase retention, right? I think that probably is number one, right? The mobile field force, because it's like the epitome of everything I was talking about. It's here, ruin your day, ruin everything you're doing. Go sit here, like sit in this van if you're lucky and you're not out on foot, right? But then follow the protesters along like a parallel block, right? And like it's like, wait, is it a legal protest? Then what are we doing here, right? Like, what are we following them for? We're creating more of a show. And I always say, protest, my number one most hated assignment that I ever had, right? In any rank. Put me in, I don't care what command, right? I will work any command in the city, patrol, right? Specialized unit, whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, to me, that is the worst because you have a group of people in the beginning of an incident, right? Like in the beginning of George Floyd, I'm sure there were people who were legitimately aggrieved and like legitimately upset, but within a couple days, those people had to go back to work. They had lives, they had kids to take to school, and we know who was left behind to protest for weeks on end. It was the same people from Occupy Wall Street. It was the same people from Zuccotti Park. I mean, literally some of the same exact people, right? Trying to agitate you, trying to get under your skin. It's horrible, right? Like, God bless the men and women of SRG, right? Like, I would never want to do that. That is my most hated assignment. And I think that, yeah, when you're getting pulled for this and it's so pointless, we know how to handle crowds in the NYPD. And what we need is we need a leader to push back on City Hall and say one of two things. Either these people are legal and we're going to let them do it, and you want them to take over the street. If they shut down Broadway, they shut down Broadway, because the way you prevent them from shutting down Broadway is you communicate with them very publicly, very openly, loudspeaker in the beginning, and you tell them if you step into the street, you will be summoned or arrested. We know that because after Ramos and Lou were executed because de Blasio let it get completely out of control And the media was actually reporting the truth about people chanting during their protests, what do we want? Dead cops, what do we want it now, right? He finally, after Ramos and Lou and the cops turned their back on him at the hospital, he said, do what you got to do, right? And we were allowed to go and shut down the protests, and legal went out and made announcements, and we did not let them march in the street. That has gone back to the way it was, before. So if we want to control protests and we want to keep things safe and want to keep it peaceful and want to keep let the cops arrest people who try to take over the street. If you do that, you're gonna save lives. You're gonna preserve public order for all of us that want to get back and forth to work, right? And you're gonna let the cops feel like cops, and that's gonna improve their morale.
Ken, what is your? By the way, again, thank you for staying so long. We appreciate it. This is a great discussion to help the cops right now. And that's what ultimately we want to do. We want to make it a better life for because we're not anti, some people want to paint this as anti-cop. We're not anti-cop at all. We love the cops. We support them. And that's why we're doing this. So what are your thoughts on I dive into it. John does it often. We talk about it, and we think it's a huge, huge impact on the NYPD. What are your thoughts on the disciplinary matrix and the role that it plays and the impact that it has on the morale of the NYPD, in real time as we speak?
Well, the disciplinary matrix, I remember when they came out with it, and I didn't think that it was a bad thing. And it's actually part of what I teach when I teach, future executives for Penn State. A disciplinary matrix is good because if as long as you hold to it, and as long as the punishments are just, right? I mean, the thing about punishment, right? And we know this is good for organizations. This is good for society in general, right? With the criminal justice system. If the punishment is too harsh, it loses its deterrent effect, because it's like not even something that you feel that you can reasonably constrain your actions to. But if it's proportionate to the crime and it's certain, right? So that you have a certainty that there's a good likelihood I'm going to get caught, and if I get caught, this is the penalty, right? Then you're less likely to do the behavior. So I like the disciplinary matrix because it's transparent. If you tell me, and I don't follow it that much, that they're not holding to their own disciplinary matrix, or that the punishment is completely disproportionate, then I would say they're not executing it properly. But the idea behind it is let people know what the penalties are and keep it fair. So it doesn't matter who right? If you get a DWI and there's a serious injury, right, you're facing termination. It doesn't matter if you're, so-and-so's nephew, or if you're, general population, as you say, Eric, right? You're going to get the same penalty. And then it gets a little hairy because we do want to have certain circumstances where we can say, okay, there's mitigating factors, right? I don't know, maybe the person's, there could be a mitigating factor or an aggravating factor. So I hope they're not manipulating that either. But I think the discipline matrix is a good thing. It's a good concept. It's a good policy as long as they're executing it properly.
So, thank you for spending so much time with us, and we definitely would love to have you come back on. And I think we're really missing a lot of the research, and I think it would take a lot of time to delve into it. But could you give us a quick overview, if you could, before we start to wrap up? Could you give us a quick overview of the studies you've done and where that research has led you now and what you're looking into now? Could you just give the audience a breakdown of your work overall?
Sure.
Where you started, what was the first survey you did, then it led to this, and now where you're going now?
Okay. So, mass exodus came from the concept that officers were going to leave, right? So we designed a survey, we distributed it, we got a very good response, and we found, right, that about 23% of the department was looking to leave imminently, right? So some of the main leading factors, finances did play a role, but also so did the cleanliness of the workplace, the condition of the equipment, which we know is always a challenge, right, in our precincts. Feeling fulfilled from the job you do, but work-life balance, right, which I personally feel like work-life balance, cleanliness of the workplace, these are things that work-life balance costs them nothing other than, limiting possibly the amount of staffing they have available. Then we took another look, and we wanted to really look at, because there's, if you're satisfied with your job, if you have job satisfaction, you are more likely going to be committed to the organization. You are going to, go out and do a better job, give a better work product to the citizens of New York, right? So we said, well, cops, they join for different reasons, right? Like all of us kind of have different reasons, but which one of those predict the best in terms of having higher job satisfaction, right? Which are realistic. And so along with that, we found, right, that basically wanting to help people, fighting crime had a much heavier impact on officer performance, their job satisfaction, than other factors, right? The pension was a reason for people to join. And yes, they tended to be more satisfied if that was a reason. But salary, guess what? So few people selected that the reason why they joined was the salary. We didn't even include it in our analysis. Because nobody says that. Nobody says I became a cop because of the salary.
You should talk to the unions.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that is what's always frustrating with the unions, right? They always talk about money, and there's so much more to being happy at work, right? I mean, why is a priest happy at work? It's not because he's making a lot of money, right? I mean, why are a lot of people happy at work? Well, I'm teaching. I don't make a lot of money, right? But it's the impact that you feel that you're making. And then we have another study in the works, not published yet, so hasn't gone through this peer review process where other people look at it. See, so that's why when something's peer reviewed, it's pretty credible, right? Because other experts look at it and say, did you think about this? Did you do this? Right? So just being transparent, it's not. The way we improved, it was essentially, it's going to be the same as the first study I talked about, mass exodus, that showed about turnover intention, but we improved it a little bit, because one of the major limitations to the first study was that if you said that you're leaving as soon as you could retire, we didn't consider that as being not having high levels of organizational commitment. But we all know, right, that there's a couple different groups in that pool of officers who would say, I'm going to leave as soon as I can get my pension, right, my full pension. And they fall into really two categories. Either I hate this place, this is torture, I'm serving a prison sentence, and as soon as I can get out of here, I am going to get out of here. Well, that officer is pretty much in the same boat as the officer who says, I'm leaving, I'm just looking for another job. The only difference there is they're chained by their pension, right? And we know there's a lot of people who feel that way. And then the second group in that category is people who say, I came on the job, I'm leaving as soon as I can get my full service pension, but I like the job, there's nothing wrong with the job. I'm just, gonna walk out the door because, hey, I want to retire at 42. I got this other career, or I'm done. I want to move, whatnot. So this next study that's going to come out is able to parse those two categories. And what we find is it's actually closer to 55%. 55% of the NYPD right now, lieutenants and below, are saying, I'm not happy at work. I'm not satisfied. I'm leaving, like as I'm either leaving right away or I'm leaving as soon as I can get that pension. And that means they don't like the job they're doing. Now, the three of us, right, are sitting here and we all talk about, I've heard you guys talk about the job and about the good things about the job and how great it is. How can you have a job that has so many things that are so great, that is such like a calling and such noble work, and yet 55% of the people who are doing it say, I hate this and I got to get out of here as soon as possible? Like, what kind of leadership failure? And some of it some of it can come from the public, but we talked about, like, you don't really expect people to necessarily love you. It's that feeling within the organization. I call it organizational cannibalism, because as the job shrinks and constricts and we have less and less people in the job, and we remain committed to, oh, well, we got to fill these mobile field forces just as much as we always did, right? We got to make sure there's not a problem. Follow the template. It's the same names going in it. You don't have as big of a pool to divide it amongst. So if you have less of a pool, you have to shrink somewhere the workload.
Well, you say organizational cannibalism. I think you're right. I think the NYPD is an organization that eats itself. But we often say it's not the external pressures, it's the internal pressures of the NYPD that affects morale, right? People understand that the public is going to have disdain for you. Some are going to love you. It's going to be ups and downs. That's a pendulum. But the internal pressures of people turn their back on you and fail leadership. And I think ultimately leadership is the most important thing. I think morale is this ball that you have to protect, and these things penetrate it if the ball is weak. And if that ball is strong, they don't penetrate. So I just want to ask you, of course, if you could tell people where to find you, where can they read this study? And if they want to get in touch with you, if you could let them know. And also, if you could just tell me, were there any expectations in your study? Like, oh, I know exactly how this is going to turn out, and it actually shocked you by the results. Was there anything in your study that the results were different from what your expectations were?
The one thing that really shocked me was it does not come out in anything that I've done up to this point about that public sentiment. I was really expecting to see more of that. The risk of the job, at least, and any study has its limitations, right? I mean, if anybody's going to be really open and honest about any kind of research, it's all a different degree as far as what the limitations are. So I never propose to say that everything has limitations. That's why we include it in the article, right? I mean, just the very nature that we're sending out a survey, perhaps the officers who are most distrustful of it aren't going to fill out the survey, right? Or maybe there's a group of cops out there who feel so great and are doing so good, they're not filling out our survey, right? I don't think so, but maybe there is. So that's a key limitation. But the thing that really struck, it's not the public, it's not the elected officials, it's not the media. That's not what's coming through. It's not showing that there's a significant difference in people who say, I love the NYPD and I'm going to stay forever, and the people who say I can't get out the door fast enough. They might both believe that sucks. There's no difference. But the difference between the cops who say I can't get out of this place fast enough and, this place is good, like I like it here, is that leadership support. It's the people, it's the internal, like you said. That's not just NYPD, that's policing in general. We always find organizational stress is a higher, officers see that as more impactful than going out in the street, possibly getting shot, getting injured, working, rotating shifts, stuff like that, where they do that. It's that internal politics, that bureaucracy, that stress that breeds resentment and makes people not satisfied with the job.
Yeah.
Oh, can you tell people where to find that study, where they could get a hold of it and get in touch with you if they want to contact you? Maybe take one of your courses. Please plug it.
Yeah, I'll put my. I'm just trying to make sure I know.
I have your LinkedIn in wherever they're watching or listening to it.
Yeah.
So I have your LinkedIn.
Okay.
Thing. So if I don't know if that's the best place.
Because I can give my email. I'll give my school email too.
Sure.
Sure.
Oh, I think I got to connect to YouTube to do it. Okay. I don't know. Maybe John, you have my email. Could you do it?
We'll put it out for you. If you could just tell them
the study.
Sure.
The thing about these studies, right, is when they get published in journals that most of the times it's not what they consider open access. So you have to be a subscriber to the journal. But if anybody emails me and they want a copy of it, I'll get a copy to them so that they can see. Or if you can get it, you could probably get it through the library, especially if they're affiliated with the school, right? Like if they go to John Jay, they can get it for free. But I'll send anybody who wants it a copy so they can read it. Yeah, this has been great. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Can we ask all retired members 2 questions? And the answers usually vary, but there's a common trend amongst all of them. We asked if you were a young man again, right? You go back. I take it a young Ken Quick at that time, 1999. Do you come on again? Do you go into the NYPD again? And then I take you as a young man, Ken Quick, but it's 2025. Do you take the NYPD job knowing what you know now?
I definitely would have gone into policing. I think, honestly, with what happened after George Floyd, see the response, see what's happening, it's hard to say. I think I might, because I think that my heart was in it so much, and my idea of, because I got warned by a lot of people beforehand. I remember speaking to, other people interested in policing. They say, you're going to go there. You know what they're going to do? They're going to put you in the worst neighborhood, and you're going to have to stand out on foot, and you're not going to see the inside of a car for a long time. Why wouldn't you want to go? Why wouldn't you want to go out here or go there? You'll be in a car right away. And I was like, because I want to do that. I want to go to New York. I want to see some real stuff. I want to help people. And if I got to be on foot, I got to be on foot. So thick-headed Ken Quick might not have realized, exactly what I'd be signing on for. And I might have done it anyway. But rational Ken Quick now would caution, only because I don't see light at the end of the tunnel for these guys. That's the problem. I'll do anything if you can tell me that, okay, once I get 5 years on the job, you're going to respect me. You're going to respect my time on. You're going to allow me to be a professional. You're not going to yank me all over the place, right? And throw me all over the city. That's the difference. I don't think young Ken Quick would know, so I signed me up, but old Ken Quick would get pissed off pretty fast.
Your answer mirrors the majority of what people are saying. We've had like 2 or 3 people who say they would go back, but even they were kind of cautious. So with that being said, before we go, we want to get to know you, Ken Quick, have a little fun. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what your life is like now. What do you do for fun besides doing surveys and studies? What do you do for fun? What are your passions or anything you're into?
Well, I like to travel. I like to travel with family, go on vacation, go different places, even like a weekend getaway, like Kalahari. Me and my son is 14. He just took up snowboarding. So he got me back into skiing, which I haven't skied since high school probably. But that's a lot of fun. We're having fun with that. I just like spending, anytime I can with my family while my kids are teenagers and they're willing to still have me around. So I realize that window is closing quickly. So I really enjoy that.
Isn't that the truth? When your kids are little, they kiss you and hug you, and then they get older, they don't want to kiss you and hug you anymore. Like, you don't want to kiss me anymore.
Yeah. Well, no, they're close to that. I mean, my daughter's definitely older. She's a little bit more, wants to be with her friends, but that's okay. It's growing up. So I like that. It's great to be around here with nature, hiking, doing that kind of stuff as well.
No, absolutely. Listen, it's been a pleasure. Why don't you hang out for a minute? We're going to read the super chats that we got. Let's see if I brought them up, but I don't remember if there's any questions. Let's see what.
Okay. One thing I'll just mention though, John, while you're lining up questions, because I do teach at DeSales University. So I just want to clue people in here who might have kids that are like college age, something I did not realize before. I always think about state universities and I look at like private college and I see the tuition and I'm like, oh, hell no. Like my kids are going to state college. But when it comes time to look for your kids, don't be afraid at some of the smaller universities, because they do give a lot of money. Even if we think, oh, well, I'm financially they're never going to get anything. No, they do. And, a smaller university, the kids get a lot more attention, a lot more better education sometimes than these huge places where they're sitting in a lecture hall with like 300 kids with the professor who only focuses on research, right? So I just figured I'd share that because it's something I learned that I think would help a lot of guys out there if they're shopping around for schools for their kids, that sometimes these smaller universities, you think, oh, it's way too expensive. They give a lot of money to go, so don't be afraid to apply.
Speaking of expensive, I don't want to put you on the spot, Ken, but the last guest that we had gave us a couple of $1,000. So I don't want to put you on the spot.
I thought you meant somebody in the chat. I was going to be like, who did that?
Oh,
yeah.
We did have some generous donations, though. You know,
So I'm living on a
gotta
fixed
say.
income. That's what I
Yeah.
tell everybody.
Yeah.
Fixed income.
No pressure, no pressure.
Yeah. So Crazy 10-7, he says, if you have a skill, talent, interest, or even curiosity, leave this mess of a job or make a step towards leaving. They don't deserve the talent they have. I mean, so that's, you know, unfortunate. It really breaks my heart to hear that. It really does. But, you know, but we do hear that often, you know, we definitely hear that often. Pat Donahue says, oh boy, he says cigars and protein powder for the followers. Any change left over could be donated to the unbanned John Eric and Sal Fund. Don't drink and tweet post. So just, you know, myself, Eric, Sal, Marlon, none of us are banned from One Police Plaza.
Yeah.
You know, I think somebody was having a bad evening last night. I don't know what they're talking about.
You know, on our little movie that Marlon put together when we got 60,000 subscribers, in the movie it says that he does this once a month, but it's starting to become like once a week.
It's like whenever there's football on.
Corey, what's up, brother?
Who we got? We got Modern Samurai. He says, morning, gents. Hope everyone is doing well. The problem is that Puzzle Palace is so detached from the actual job. Elites being trained by the elites are the problem. Do because I say, not because I know what's better. You know, so Modern Samurai, another one, you know, thanks for the weigh in. And then we have George Misfud. Good morning, man. Have a great Christmas. Same to you guys. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy Hanukkah to everybody. I know Hanukkah just started. I was waiting on Eric to say it, but, you know, he's not, you know, he doesn't.
Well, I was waiting for, you know, some people to, you know, give us some guilt for Hanukkah.
Yeah.
And John, you and I were both in the 6-6. We should be wishing happy Hanukkah.
Yeah, seriously.
Exactly. Very true.
Happy Hanukkah, everyone. If you feel, you know, don't feel pressured, but, you know, it's a good time to send some coffee and donuts and maybe send some matzahs my way.
So, and Ken, before you run, just any advice you got for young cops, young executives, the job, anything you want, anything you think you'd like to, and again, as your studies progress, we'd love to keep having you come back on to discuss them more in depth. You know, this was more like an overview of you than the studies, but we'd rather, you know.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, and I would definitely welcome that. I just the advice, you know, the one guy who said, you know, if you got talent, this and that, time to get out. I mean, that is disheartening. The one thing I'll say, I would not be where I am in this world without the NYPD, right? Like, let's say if I had like 2 years on and I was like, you know what, screw this job, I'm just going to become a PhD. I would be like another PhD studying stuff, but I would not have had the experience that I had. I mean, I am like, I had a great career. I had a great run. Little bit of luck involved, right? Hard work, right? But I do think that hard work pays off. Eventually it gets recognized. I say there's no light at the end of the tunnel. I hope that there is, right? It's always darkest before the dawn. I'm hoping that they find a way to turn this around and really restore this to the great profession. That last study, it's off the charts how much job pride and organization affects what we do, right? So if I had any advice to leaders too, it would be, you got to tap into that, right? You got to tap into that and the noble cause that this job, this profession has, but this department, you got to tap into that pride. We've never liked 1PP. Like, we can sit here and say it got worse, but we never loved them. So any feelings that I had about this job were from the men and women that I worked with every day. And if you're a commander or you're even a sergeant, right, you can create that for your squad. We could say it might be harder than it was when I did it, but you could still do it. That we're a team. We're going to get through this together.
Yeah, listen, thank you so much. You heard it today. Ken Quick showed us some real stamina, 2.5 hours. Thank you so much for walking us through your career, walking us through your education, your academia, walk us through your perspective. And what I appreciate most is your humility and your responses. And I appreciate your time. You show real character and great attitude. And I only wish we had worked together. It's a pleasure to meet you here. And you're welcome. If you want to ever come on a round table, if you want to give any perspective, you're always welcome. We always welcome our guests. So thank you so much. And the support and the comments you got from the friends and listeners that we have, outstanding. So it really shows who you are. God bless your retirement with your family, and I hope that you're enjoying teaching. It really sounds like you love it and your passion, and I look forward to your future studies. So thank you so much, Ken Quick. Your final words, the Finest Unfiltered.
Yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for having me on. Like I said, I got into this, right, because I wanted really to try to shine a light on the profession and show the outside world some of what, the men and women in blue are doing. If anybody said hi in the chat, I didn't even look at the chat because I knew, like, trying to decipher the names and who is that person, right? It would totally like throw me off. I would start reading it instead of talking. So if I have any friends out there who said hi, thank you for your support, and I'm sure it was great working with you. And thank you to you guys.
Yeah, we got Corey Pegues jumped on. He said he wished everybody happy holidays, as well as Charlie on the Parkway.
That's right.
Oh, I remember Charlie.
John, you got any Charlie on the Parkway?
We got to get Charlie on the podcast. Charlie needs to come on the podcast.
Yeah, you got to get him on.
Yeah.
Corey, my man, how you doing, brother? Corey's been doing some good stuff on his podcast too. So check it out. You get a chance.
Yeah,
good
check
stuff.
it out. Corey's Corner. Yeah. I've been watching Corey. We've been watching. So
yeah.
All right, Kenny. Like we said, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, everybody. We'll be back on Wednesday. Make sure you check out the Sal Greco show tomorrow. That'll be at 13:05. We'll be on myself, Eric, and Marlon. We kind of did a reverse because we wanted to get Ken on. He teaches on Wednesdays, so we'll do a round table then. We'll get into that. So we appreciate everybody for joining, and we'll be back at you.
The 10-4 Tavern Tuesday night. 10-4 Tavern, man.
Tuesday night, 10-4 Tavern. Executive Perspective Wednesday night. I know Executive Perspectives having they're having former assistant commissioner Kevin O'Connor on. He's going to come on. They're going to discuss Kaz Daughtry's retirement. Tom and Pete, they're having on Las Vegas Metro. Damn, do you remember who it is?
Yeah, I had the name. Yeah, let me see if I can find it again. Anyway. Las Vegas.
We'll promote it. Check out our social media. It'll be on there. Yeah, sorry about that brain fart. But all right, guys. We'll be back at you. We had about 900 people on this morning. You kept the audience, Ken. So congrats. Yeah.
All right.
Ken Quick. It wasn't so quick, man. He stayed up for a long time. We appreciate it.
So, all right, guys. Take care. Finest Unfiltered.
There's a handful of retired officers that don't live in the state that have a lot to say about the dream team, as I like to call it. All of a sudden, they retire and have a master plan on how to fight crime, but nothing to contribute when they were here. They want to come back and be part of the dream team. What can I say?